Jon felt the weight of the entire north pressing upon him as the cold wind whipped his face, standing at the precipice of a ravaged battlefield. The night sky hung with bruised clouds, obscuring the wan moon. The trampled snow beneath his boots bore testament to a war that seemed unceasing. Its echoes haunted him, the last roar of a dying giant, the wail of a mother losing her son, the labored cry of a wounded horse. Beyond the mounds of fresh graves and the still groaning wounded, the desolation of the land was a silent condemnation. He could still see the silhouettes of the unsullied forming a defensive line, heard the crackle of torches that glowed with ghostly illumination. Every breath filled his lungs with cold so sharp it felt like broken glass slicing him from within. When he closed his eyes, he could see the final moments of the battle against the Night King, that dreadful presence whose very aura sapped hope from men's hearts. Jon recalled the sparks when Longclaw met the Night King's ice spear, how the monstrous White Walkers advanced inexorably, and how Daenerys's dragons filled the sky with fire and fury. Yet the memory that burned brightest was that of Viserion's unearthly shriek as his blue-flamed breath sighed across the battlefield. Under the Night King's undead thrall, the once golden dragon had become a living scar of frost and malevolence, a beacon of terror that battered at the walls of Winterfell, turning ramparts to rubble. Jon remembered cursing the gods at that moment, praying for some power to undo the fallen creature's torment. On the morrow of that great conflict, Winterfell's courtyard became a somber gathering place. They had beaten back the undead horde, not forever, they all feared, but for a time. Fires burned low in the brazier pits, and men, women, and children alike nursed deep wounds. The sky began to lighten as though dawn were straining to scatter the gloom. Yet an anxiety thrummed through every conversation, for the Night King had not been destroyed, only forced to retreat. His hold on the newly risen Viserion remained. Jon thought of Daenerys, who stared at the horizon as if trying to see beyond mortal sight. He recognized the heartbreak in her eyes, the torment at having lost a second child, albeit through dark sorcery rather than death. Drogon and Rhaegal circled the castle, restless. Their roars signaled a confusion, perhaps an ache, over the missing member of their draconic kin. Jon had never truly claimed to be a prophet, nor did he believe himself chosen by the gods. He had come back from death, yes, yet even that miracle felt as if it belonged to another man. Still, the stirring in his breast told him that something monumental was beginning to shift. He sensed beneath the howling wind a call that transcended words and flesh. It was as though the entire land, from the shivering sea to the deserts of Dorne, begged for deliverance from the creeping specter of an undead legion. Jon gazed at Daenerys, the Targaryen queen whose authority and sorrow were both etched in every line of her face, and then at Tyrion, who paced anxiously like a trapped animal with too much on his mind. It was Tyrion who first broke the silence in the still, snow-dusted courtyard. "We can't let the Night King keep Viserion," he said quietly. "We might have survived this battle, but if we allow him to keep a dragon at his beck and call, the next time we face him there may be no chance at victory." Daenerys didn't answer at once. Her gaze lifted to where Rhaegal perched atop a half-crumbled tower. Drogon soared low overhead, the force of his wings stirring flurries of snow and cinders. "No chance," she echoed. Her voice was distant, as if speaking from a faraway dream. "Dragons are not just weapons. They are threads in the tapestry of fate. If he keeps Viserion under his thrall, we face a darkness beyond imagining." Jon felt his jaw tighten. "And yet, we don't have the faintest notion how to free him." Bran Stark sat to one side, silent in his wheeled chair. No longer truly the little brother Jon had once known, this was the three-eyed raven, an enigmatic presence of swirling memories and visions. "Perhaps," Bran said calmly, "there is a way. The Night King's power is strong, but it is not absolute. To bind a dragon to his will, he must maintain that bond through ice and death. Were that link severed, Viserion might return to his true nature." Daenerys' eyes sparked with something like hope. "Severed how?" Tyrion's brow creased. "A feat easier said than done. We barely kept him at bay last time. The beast's flames turned half the battlements to ice-shattered rubble. If we try to fight Viserion again..." Jon interrupted softly, "We aren't going to fight Viserion. We're going to save him." He spoke the words with an earnest conviction he could scarcely explain. There was a conviction in his heart that told him if a dragon could be lost to darkness, then perhaps it could be won back to the light. A hush fell over them, carrying with it the echoes of the darkest night's battle. For a moment, all thoughts converged on the unimaginable, a rescue not for a wounded friend, but for a dragon transformed into a monstrous reflection of the Night King's wrath. Daenerys turned to Jon, her silver-gold hair whipped by the biting wind. "Tell me what you're thinking." Jon sighed, glancing at Bran. If Bran can see into the past, or even the present from afar, he might glean how the Night King holds Viserion. "Maybe we can learn a weakness. But it'll be dangerous." We'd need to confront him or risk everything. Bran's voice was calm, but in the shadows of his gaze, haunted visions flickered. If we do nothing, the next time he comes, Viserion's power will be greater. The Night King grows bolder, and darkness gathers beyond the wall. To Jon's surprise, he saw a flicker of the old dragon's fury in Daenerys. The heartbreak at losing Viserion had softened into something resolute, vengeful, and determined. "We will not let him keep one of my children," she said, the final words nearly spat out. "I'd lay down my life for my dragons, just as I would for my people." Tyrion gave a slow nod. "Then we must plan carefully. We need to glean any advantage we can. It's not enough to just brandish dragoglass or Valyrian steel." Grey Worm, silent until then, stepped forward to bow. "The Unsullied stand ready, your grace. Let us know what is needed." Ser Davos shook his head, lines of weariness etched across his face. "We'll not march an entire army beyond the wall again, not with winter's chill deepening. We'd lose half our men to the cold alone. A smaller, more surgical approach might be our only hope, if any hope exists at all." Jon weighed their words. "Yes, a smaller group. We can't fight an entire army of the dead and a dragon. We need to find a way to breach the link between the Night King and Viserion, somehow." Bran's eyes went distant, a glaze that suggested he was seeing things beyond their immediate realm. "There's an ancient lore about how magical bonds can be broken. It's not easy. Blood, strong magic, and exchange of life force, these are the ways. But we have so few sorcerers left. The Red Woman is gone. And I see places, memories, events, but I can't simply conjure powers that do not belong to me." Daenerys hesitated, as though a thought half-formed snagged her mind. "I recall a woman once telling me that the dragons are magic given flesh. Perhaps if a dragon calls to a dragon, that bond might conflict with the Night King's hold." She met Jon's gaze. "Drogon and Rhaegal, they pine for Viserion. They might be key to weakening the Night King's influence." Jon rubbed his gloved hand over his weary face. "We should move swiftly. If the Night King is recovering, we risk him gathering an even greater undead horde. With every fallen warrior, he grows stronger. We can't allow him the time." They stood there, silent in their shared resolve. The horizon in the east hinted at dawn, a faint glow that turned the sky from black to a deep indigo. Jon's breath hung in the air as he exhaled. Finally, Daenerys stepped closer to him, voice lowered yet fierce. "We have to do this, Jon Snow. Or no, Aegon Targaryen, your name does not matter. You share my blood. The dragon sensed something in you." Her eyes flickered with both sorrow and determination. "We save Viserion, or die trying." Those last words echoed through Jon's mind for the rest of the morning. The War Council convened, huddling in the Great Hall, which still bore scorch marks from undead wights. Plans were proposed and discarded. Danger was the one certainty. In the end, the best they could muster was a bold infiltration far beyond the wall into what was once the territory of the Free Folk, now a haunted land that the Night King prowled with near impunity. Bran's visions suggested that the Night King had withdrawn to the Fist of the First Men, that ancient ring fort on a lonely hill, overlooking the endless white expanse. They decided upon a small group: Jon, Daenerys, and a few select warriors. Rhaegal and Drogon would be crucial, for they carried fire and, hopefully, the intangible bond of draconic kinship that might undo the Night King's hold on their lost brother. Bran would remain at Winterfell, forging a link with Jon through a mixture of warging magic and greensight to guide them in real time, if the plan worked. A slender hope, but hope nonetheless. Tyrion would stay behind with the main forces, continuing to shore up the battered defenses in case of betrayal or a second wave of the undead. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. The blacksmiths toiled ceaselessly, forging spears and arrowheads of dragon glass. The remaining dragons circled overhead, at times letting out thunderous roars that shook the entire castle. Daenerys spent hours alone in the yard, her eyes upon Rhaegal and Drogon as if trying to commune with them in ways no one else could fathom. Jon found himself pacing the courtyard late at night, the memory of the biting wind beyond the wall tugging at the corners of his mind. Ghost followed him sometimes, padding silently by his side, a reminder that Jon, too, once had a bond with a creature not of his own flesh. The direwolf's unwavering loyalty comforted him, though the tension in the air permeated everything. Samwell Tarly, always a surprising source of knowledge, came to Jon's side with a few ancient tomes rescued from the Citadel. I don't know if these can help," Sam said earnestly, dark circles under his eyes. "But they speak of certain rites, incantations that the Valyrians used to tame dragons. If you can adapt them, maybe it'll strengthen your call to Viserion or break the Night King's curse. I wish I could go with you, but you're needed here, Jon said, placing a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder. Sam nodded, though his eyes flickered with worry. Just don't die out there, he added, half joking, half pleading. I'll do my best, Jon answered, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Finally the day arrived. A frosty dawn broke, and the group gathered in the courtyard. 4 of the best archers carrying dragonglass-tipped arrows, a handful of reliable fighters who'd been beyond the wall before, and Grey Worm, who refused to stay behind. Daenerys, regally clad in warm furs over her leathers, stood by Drogon's flank, her eyes narrowed in determination. Jon approached Rhaegal, whose breath steamed the cold air around his scaled nostrils. Jon felt a knot in his gut. Though he had flown on Rhaegal's back before, it was never an act taken lightly. Bran, seated near the gates, began his chanting, eyes rolling back. Through the drifting snow, Jon could see Bran's hands clench against the arms of his chair as he warged into crows, searching for any sign of the Night King's movements ahead. Tyrion was there, lips pressed in a tight line as he offered a final, silent nod of encouragement. Jon climbed into the saddle upon Rhaegal, gripping the ridges of the dragon's neck. Daenerys climbed Drogon, her presence radiant even in the gloom. With a bellowing roar that shook the icicles from the ramparts, Drogon leapt skyward. The whoosh of wings battered the courtyard. Rhaegal followed, stirring snow into swirling eddies. On the ground, the small band began their march, accompanied by the howling wind, heading north and beyond the wall. Winter had them in its teeth. By the time the group reached Castle Black, their cloaks were stiff with ice. The dragon's presence unnerved the garrison, but the men parted out of respect for Daenerys and for Jon, once Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The old black gate stood open, beckoning them into a realm of endless white drifts and foreboding silence. The few who recalled the old days, when Mance Rayder's wildling horde once threatened, could scarcely believe the same land now lay under the pall of an even darker threat. As they ventured forth, the land seemed to groan under the weight of winter's oppression. Frost-covered pines loomed, their branches weighed down by heavy snow. The sky was a perpetual leaden gray, offering no solace from the biting cold. At times, Jon and Daenerys flew overhead, scouting or simply providing a vantage point. The 2 living dragons, majestic even under the bleak sun, left swirling patterns of stirred snow in their wake. They saw the first signs of the undead presence a day's march beyond the wall. Bran's crows, at times a swirl of black in the sky, guided them to avoid roving packs of whites. Charred remnants of old wildling camps dotted the landscape, twisted bits of bone and wood jutting from the snow. Near dusk, they spotted an entire field of corpses, arrayed in a spiral pattern that reeked of the Night King's hideous artistry. Even though the whites were absent, that arrangement was a silent warning, a testament to his cruelty and twisted control. When they made camp, they did so in hushed vigilance. Grey Worm and the small group of Unsullied with him formed a circle, weapons at the ready. The remaining archers cast nervous glances into the shadows beyond the firelight. Daenerys sat near Drogon, stroking the dragon's scales as he nestled close to provide warmth. Jon huddled by Rhaegal, who exhaled a comforting gust of hot breath that melted the snow near him. Nighttime brought its own terrors. The wind howled like a chorus of vengeful spirits. At one point, Ghost let out a sharp growl, and Grey Worm sprang to his feet, spear poised. Shapes flickered in the gloom, but they proved to be nothing more than illusions cast by the dancing flames. Sleep came fitfully at best, and each dream was fraught with images of skeletal hands grasping from beneath the ice, of Viserion's shriek that splintered the night sky. At dawn, Bran reached them through his warging. Jon stiffened as he felt the distant pressure in his mind, like a half-remembered dream whispering at the edges of consciousness. Bran conveyed a single message: the Night King was indeed at the fist of the first men, and with him Viserion. The undead dragon was not roving. The Night King seemed to wait. Why he waited was the question, but that was the best chance they'd ever have. When they set forth again, tensions ran high. Each crunch of snow beneath their boots and claws, for the dragons walked at times to conserve energy, felt magnified by the silence around them. The sun never fully emerged, trapped behind banks of gray clouds. Daenerys's posture atop Drogon was rigid, but her eyes burned with purpose. Jon, astride Rhaegal, tried to steady his breathing with each leathery flap of wings. He rehearsed in his mind what Sam had taught him of old Valyrian incantations, simple phrases that might coax a dragon's true nature to surface. The plan, in all its desperation, hinged on a moment of draconic recognition. If Viserion could hear the call of his queen, his siblings, or even the call of Targaryen blood through Jon, maybe that could break the Night King's hold. After a final half-day's journey, they crested a ridge where the wind whipped with ferocity. Below them lay the circular plateau of the Fist of the First Men. Jon felt a tremor run through his bones. It was quiet, too quiet, in fact. The flat area, ringed with ancient stone defenses, was devoid of movement save for a single, ghostly figure in the center. The Night King stood, clad in his armor of icy segments, face impassive, eyes glowing that unnatural blue. Beside him, a massive shape shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. Viserion. The undead dragon's scales, once cream and gold, were now bone-white, patched with black frost. Steam rose from his breath, or perhaps it was cold mist, for it was impossible to tell if any living heat remained within him. Jon swallowed. From this distance, Viserion's presence was terrifying, like beholding a statue sculpted from winter's fury. Tyrion had once said that a dragon's eyes hold a flicker of intelligence and fierce spirit. Now, Viserion's eyes shone with the same eerie blue as the Night King's, devoid of warmth. The small group of mortals, dread clawing at their hearts, prepared. The plan dictated that Jon and Daenerys would approach from the sky, while Grey Worm and the archers flanked from below. They would attempt a pincer maneuver, hoping that Drogon and Rhaegal's roars and flames would create the opening needed for Jon or Daenerys to break the undead enchantment with either the incantations or some raw, desperate moment of connection. Jon spurred Rhaegal, and the dragon leapt into flight, powerful wings heaving against the wind. Daenerys and Drogon rose alongside them, twin shapes of scaled might. As they swooped down, the Night King tilted his head ever so slightly, as if amused. Viserion roared, a hideous sound that was once majestic. Blue flame erupted from the undead dragon's maw, tearing across the sky in a jagged arc. Jon barely steered Rhaegal aside, feeling the fringes of that unnatural cold flame brush past. He felt Rhaegal's pain through some strange bond, as if needles of ice had pricked the dragon's flank. Daenerys and Drogon answered with fire, a golden inferno that bathed the plateau. Snow hissed into steam, the ground beneath turning into slush and mud. But as soon as the flames struck Viserion, a swirl of swirling wind and ice seemed to cloak him, dampening the fire's effect. The Night King stood unmoving, an implacable figure in the swirling maelstrom. Below, Grey Worm and the archers advanced. The Unsullied's discipline led them through the treacherous, half-melted terrain toward the ring fort. The archers knocked their dragonglass arrows, hearts pounding. If the plan worked, they wouldn't need to kill Viserion, only offer covering fire in case wights appeared or if the Night King attempted to close the distance. Jon and Daenerys circled again, swooping low. Through the wind's roar, Jon heard Daenerys call out Viserion. Her voice echoed across the plateau, regal yet tinged with heartbreak. Jon saw Drogon's eyes focus on the undead dragon, and for a moment, Drogon's roar seemed not so much an attack as a lament. Rhaegal joined in, the combined thunder of living draconic voices echoing over the peaks and valleys of that frosty wilderness. Viserion answered with a savage shriek, the blue flame bursting forth again. Jon veered left, then abruptly angled Rhaegal so that his flank faced Viserion. This was the moment to try. Clutching at the ridges of Rhaegal's neck, Jon began muttering the Valyrian phrases Sam had shown him. It was a halting chant, stilted with uncertainty, but he poured every ounce of his conviction into each syllable. Dracarys, he whispered in the old tongue, followed by lines that invoked kinship and blood. He felt Rhaegal's body tense, as if the Dr. Aegon recognized something in Jon's voice. He repeated it, louder, straining to be heard above the raging wind and shrieking dragons. Viserion, Dohaeris. Dohaeris Hanujagan. Serve your true nature, heed the call. For a heartbeat, just a single instant, Viserion's blue gaze flickered. Jon could have sworn he saw a glimmer of recognition, a flash of gold or green behind that veil of undead ensorcelment. But the Night King stretched forth a hand, and a jagged wave of supernatural cold radiated through the air, battering both Drogon and Rhaegal. Jon felt it like knives against his face, even through the thick furs. Rhaegal groaned, battered by this invisible wave of chilling force. He struggled to maintain flight. Drogon stumbled in the air, and Daenerys gasped as she clutched at his neck. Below, Grey Worm led his charge. The Unsullied reached the outskirts of the plateau, scanning for signs of whites. At first, the ground seemed empty, but then the snow shifted and half-buried shapes stirred. Scores of whites emerged, a gruesome host of skeletal warriors, frostbitten corpses draped in ragged hides. They rose with scraping, hissing noises. The archers loosed their dragonglass arrows and the first rank of undead collapsed, shrieking in blackened decay. But more came, unstoppable, pressing in on the living. The clash of steel against bone resounded as Grey Worm's spear spun, lethal and precise, though the relentlessness of the undead was terrifying. Jon urged Rhaegal downward, hoping to aid the foot soldiers, but another blast of blue flame from Viserion forced him to pull up. He spared a glance at Daenerys. She was urging Drogon to focus on the smaller whites, clearing a path so that Grey Worm and the archers could approach the Night King. Twice, Drogon's fire breath carved wide swaths through the undead horde, turning snow to sizzling water, corpses to ash. But the enemy kept coming, unstoppable as though conjured from the depths of winter's darkest night. Hovering above that swirling melee, Jon saw the Night King's gaze lock onto him. The intensity of those blue eyes made Jon's blood run cold. He thought back to Har Home, to the eerie moment when the Night King raised his arms and brought the dead to life. Fear threatened to choke him, but he fought it back, focusing on the memory of Viserion before his fall. He remembered how gentle the dragon could be with Daenerys, how vibrant his scales had been in the desert sun. The idea that the Night King had perverted that life into a weapon of ice lit a fury within Jon's chest. He dove again, ignoring the blasts of frigid air. He chanted those half-remembered lines in Old Valyrian. The words tasted of blood and ancient magic on his tongue, carrying the power of a Targaryen heritage he'd never asked for. This time, he called Viserion's name clearly, unafraid. Rhaegal roared, a clarion challenge. Jon thought he saw Viserion falter, wavering in midair as if an internal battle raged behind those glowing eyes. Then, with a burst of savage rage, Viserion lunged, his jaws aimed at Rhaegal. The impact sent both dragons tumbling in the sky, scales scraping, claws raking. Jon clung desperately, feeling Rhaegal's pain course through him. The wind howled as the two dragons locked in a twisting, savage embrace, plummeting dangerously close to the ground. At the last second, Rhaegal wrenched free. Jon glimpsed something horrifying. Patches of Viserion's flesh and scale clung to Rhaegal's claws, frozen and black. Rhaegal let out a troubled cry as though repulsed by the unnatural texture of undead flesh. Viserion's eyes flared a deeper hue of blue, an unholy glare that reeked of the Night King's presence. Jon heard Daenerys' voice, carried on the wind, "Viserion." "Enough." She repeated it in High Valyrian, her tone a royal command. Drogon flanked the undead dragon, beating his wings to corral Viserion away from Rhaegal. For a moment it seemed Viserion might respond, but the Night King lifted his spear of ice and hurled it at Drogon with uncanny strength. Daenerys gasped. Drogon pivoted midair, the spear grazing his side. A shower of black scales fell, and Drogon roared in agony, though he managed to stay aloft. On the ground, the clash intensified. Grey Worm and the Unsullied formed a phalanx, their shields interlocked as they drove dragonglass spears through the press of whites. More came from every direction, half-frozen corpses shrieking in mindless hunger. The archers stood behind the shield wall, loosing volley after volley, each arrow claiming another undead life. But the swarm was vast, and no matter how many they felled, more rose. The snow around them churned into a crimson and black morass. Jon circled again, heart hammering in his chest. He spotted the Night King striding through the carnage as if unconcerned by the mayhem around him. Jon felt an unbidden surge of hatred. The Night King cared nothing for life. To him, everything was a puppet for his dark will. Jon realized that to save Viserion, he might need to confront the Night King directly. But how? The swirling battlefield, the raging dragons, the mass of whites, it was a chaos that defied logic or order. The next moments happened so fast Jon could scarcely process them. Daenerys drove Drogon downward, unleashing a torrent of fire aimed not at Viserion but at the Night King himself. Flames engulfed the icy figure. Steam hissed and roiled. Jon dared to hope that perhaps they might destroy him as they once tried at Winterfell. But then, through the blazing inferno, the Night King strode forth unharmed, his aura of frost repelling the flames. Still atop Drogon, Daenerys' face twisted in frustration. "It doesn't work. Gods help us, he's unstoppable." Jon banked Rhaegal to land, the dragon's wings churning the churned-up snow into a flurry. Jon dismounted with a leap, one hand on Longclaw's hilt. Ghost, who had stuck close to the fray, dashed to his side, bristling. The cold air bit with savage teeth, but Jon moved forward, driven by an unshakable urge to end this. As he advanced, he was vaguely aware of Grey Worm and the Unsullied pushing the whites aside to clear a path. The Night King stood near the center of that plateau, Viserion circling overhead like a vulture. Jon pressed onward, each step a defiance of the glacial numbness that tried to claim him. He cast a quick glance at Daenerys, who landed Drogon some distance away, wounded but still alive, the dragon's black scales glistening with blood. He saw the shock and desperation in her eyes, yet also a fierce encouragement. She believed in him, believed that somehow he could succeed. When Jon finally stood across from the Night King, only a few yards of slush and broken ice separated them. He gripped Longclaw, remembering the first time he'd faced a White Walker, how that unearthly creature had shattered ordinary steel. But Valyrian steel was different, as was Dragoglass. This was the final stand. The Night King's voice was a low rasp, a language foreign and ancient. He raised one clawed hand, tendrils of icy mist coiling around his fingers. Jon felt a numbing chill grip his limbs, but he fought it, forcibly willing himself to stand. Above, Viserion circled, roaring with a chilling fury that made the air vibrate. Jon heard his own heartbeat, thunderous in his ears. He recalled Sam's incantations, the line about forging a link with a dragon's lost soul. He began to speak the words haltingly, in a voice that quavered but did not break. The Night King's eyes narrowed. An unseen force slammed into Jon, driving him to his knees. Cold overcame his senses, a biting, marrow-deep freeze that threatened to steal his breath, his life. He saw the frost forming on his gloves, creeping up the fur of his cloak. But he continued chanting. If he faltered now, they were all lost. Viserion landed behind the Night King, tail lashing, jaws parted in a snarl of mingled fury and pain. Daenerys, from her vantage point, cried out, "Viserion, come back to me." Her voice echoed again in High Valyrian. Jon added his own words to hers, forging a tapestry of pleas and commands. They invoked the name of House Targaryen, the right of dragons, the living bond. He pressed the ancient magic with all the earnestness in his heart. The Night King lifted his arms again, presumably to deliver a blow that would end Jon's life. Time seemed to slow. In that instant, Jon locked eyes with Viserion. He saw the swirling conflict, the torment beneath the surface. Something about the combined voices of Jon, Daenerys, Drogon, and Rhaegal seemed to resonate. A low, rumbling growl escaped the undead dragon's throat. He recoiled slightly from the Night King, as though fighting an invisible tether. The Night King's head snapped toward Viserion in anger. A silent command, a ruthless clamp of will, tried to reassert control. But then Drogon roared from behind, unleashing a massive column of fire not at the Night King, but around Viserion, cocooning him in a swirling tempest of flame. Rhaegal joined in, amplifying the heat. It was as if the living dragons were trying to incinerate the undead magic that bound their brother. Jon took advantage of the distraction. Struggling to stand, he flung himself forward. Longclaw's blade arced through the air, seeking the Night King's chest. Yet the creature spun with otherworldly speed, knocking the blade aside. An icy dagger formed in the Night King's hand, aimed at Jon's heart. Ghost intervened, fangs bared. The dire wolf latched onto the Night King's arm, forcing that lethal thrust to go wide. In a single fluid motion, Jon pivoted, bringing Longclaw down in a slash that cleaved the Night King's side. The impact was like striking hardened crystal. A crack formed, spiderwebbing across the Night King's torso. A hiss of energy escaped, but he did not fall. Instead, with terrifying strength, he flung Ghost aside. The dire wolf landed with a pained yelp in the snow. Desperate, Jon pressed the attack, hacking again, ignoring the numbness in his fingers. The Night King parried, shards of ice flying. The sound was like metal scraping on glass. They exchanged a flurry of blows, each more forceful than the last. Then the Night King backhanded Jon with monstrous power. Jon was thrown onto his back, the world spinning. His lungs seized at the frigid air. Above them, the swirling storm of fire around Viserion reached a fever pitch. Viserion roared in anguish, battered by the combined flames of Drogon and Rhaegal. And yet, Jon sensed a shift in that cry. It was no longer purely that wailing undead shriek. There was an undertone, a note of living fury. Daenerys shouted words of encouragement in Valyrian. The thunder of wings pounded the sky. In that moment, Jon saw the Night King poised to deliver the killing blow. The swirling storm parted, giving Jon a glimpse of Viserion bathed in firelight. The undead dragon's eyes flickered again, the blue receding like a tide, replaced by swirling gold flecked with veins of azure. as if the enchantment was being fought from within. And then, with a savage scream, Viserion whipped his tail. The Night King recoiled in surprise. Some intangible link between them seemed to tear. Jon glimpsed the Night King's face twist in fury, maybe even fear. Jon reacted. He flung Longclaw upward, burying the Valyrian steel into the Night King's chest, right through the crack that had begun to form. The Night King let out a guttural hiss. A surge of freezing cold radiated from him, nearly stopping Jon's heart. But Jon held firm, twisting the blade. The crack spread, fracturing like shattered ice. Slowly, impossibly, the Night King's form began to crumble, collapsing into shards and swirling frost. A shriek went up from the wights around them, echoed across the plateau. They seized up, convulsing as if the puppet strings controlling them had just been cut. One by one, they collapsed, turning to dust, leaving only broken bones or mushy flesh behind. The entire undead army was undone in a rush, the abrupt stillness afterward almost deafening. But Jon didn't watch them crumble. His eyes were on Viserion, who had reared back with a final, heart-rending roar of agony. The swirl of fire around him dissipated, and he collapsed onto the ground. Daenerys leapt from Drogon, stumbling in the melted snow as she rushed to Viserion's side. Jon scrambled to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs, ignoring the swirl of dead wights around him. He sprinted toward the fallen dragon. Where once deathly pale scales had stretched, there was now a patchwork of charred flesh and crackling frost. Steam poured off Viserion's body as the intense heat fought with the lingering cold. Daenerys placed both hands on the dragon's massive jaw, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. Viserion's eyes were open, and though the color was more natural than the icy blue, they still flickered with residual torment. He was alive, or at least no longer fully undead. But his breaths came in ragged gasps. Jon arrived at Daenerys' side, chest heaving. He lay a trembling hand on the dragon's neck. Viserion's scales were boiling hot in some places, ice cold in others, the remnants of an otherworldly fight raging within. Jon felt the resonance of the draconic bond, that intangible cord connecting Viserion to his kin. He placed his other hand on Daenerys' shoulder. "Speak to him," he whispered, still panting. "He'll hear you." Daenerys nodded, her voice choked by tears. In Valyrian, she soothed him, commanded him to remember who he was. Her child, hatched from the pyre, a free spirit of fire and sky. She poured every ounce of her love and sorrow into her words. Jon felt something stirring, an ancient magic that existed in the Targaryen bloodline and in the dragons themselves. It was neither wholly logical nor purely spiritual. It was a living link of hearts and souls. A tremor passed through Viserion's body. He drew in a long, ragged breath, exhaling faint wisps of steam. Daenerys spoke again, and Jon felt the dragon's muscles relax by degrees. The savage tension in Viserion's limbs melted away. Slowly, haltingly, the great beast lifted his head. His gaze settled on Daenerys. That luminous gold in his eyes solidified, chasing away the last vestiges of azure necromancy. He blinked once, twice. Daenerys wept openly, pressing her forehead to the dragon's muzzle. She whispered a single word, "Dracarys," not as a command to burn, but as a prayer that the fire of life remain. In the eerie quiet that followed, the sounds of collapsing wights faded into a hush broken only by the crackle of ice and the rumble of shifting earth. The Night King was gone, his army undone, the swirling storm overhead beginning to dissipate. Grey Worm and the Unsullied stood among the remains, exhausted but alive. Drogon and Rhaegal landed nearby, both battered and panting. They edged closer to Viserion, sniffing and nuzzling him in a tentative reunion. In that moment, Jon witnessed something he had never expected to see: all three dragons, living, breathing, together again. There was no question that Viserion bore scars inside and out from his time under the Night King's thrall. Frost-cracked scales, patches of skin that might never fully heal, and a haunted look that lingered at the edges of his draconic eyes. But he was free. Jon dropped to his knees, relief flooding him. His lungs burned from the icy exertion and every part of his body ached. Ghost staggered up, limping, to nudge Jon with a cold nose. Jon ruffled the direwolf's fur. Around them, the Unsullied cheered, a quiet, exhausted rejoicing that came from men who had fought one of the darkest enemies in history and emerged victorious. Daenerys remained with Viserion, one hand on the dragon's brow, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. The pall that had haunted the skies began to lift. A weak sun broke through, illuminating the plateau with pale light. It felt like a benediction from the old gods and the new. The swirling crows overhead scattered, perhaps some of them still guided by Bran's sight. When at last Daenerys turned to Jon, her expression was a mixture of awe, sorrow, and hope. "He's back," she murmured, as if she hardly dared believe her own words. Jon nodded, forcing down the lump in his throat. "We did it," he replied, though the enormity of what had just happened still felt unreal. She approached him, arms trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The weight of the war, the looming threat of an endless winter, and the heartbreak they both endured all coalesced in that glance. Daenerys opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught. Instead, she embraced Jon fiercely, pressing her head against his chest. He held her in turn, feeling her tears dampen his cloak as he let out a shaky exhale. Grey Worm approached, saluting. His usually stoic face showed a glimmer of relief. "Your Grace, my queen," he said, "the whites have all collapsed. No more appear to be rising. I believe they are all gone." The final words held a quiet astonishment. Jon closed his eyes momentarily, sending a silent prayer of thanks to any deity that might be listening. He looked at Viserion, who now lay on the ground, breathing with difficulty but very much alive. Rhaegal and Drogon flanked their brother, occasionally crooning low rumbles as though comforting him. Wisps of frost still clung to Viserion's wounds, but his gaze was clear. The dragons had long been a symbol of House Targaryen's might. Now, in this fleeting victory, they symbolized something more, the defiance of life against death's tyranny. The journey back to Winterfell was arduous. They had to tend to Viserion's injuries, which were unlike any normal wounds. Daenerys and Jon took turns flying while the small group led the dragon on foot when he was too weak to lift off. Drogon and Rhaegal stayed close, providing warmth and a sense of camaraderie that transcended mere animal behavior. Sometimes Viserion would release a shaky breath of flame tinged with flecks of blue, as if the last remnants of the Night King's power had not fully dissipated. Yet with each passing day, the dragon seemed more like himself, reclaiming the regal bearing that once defined him. During that trek, the weather turned mild for the first time in memory. The freezing wind lessened, the skies cleared. Some said that, with the Night King's power broken, an unseen yoke on the land had lifted, allowing a brief reprieve from winter's harshest teeth. When they finally reached the wall, passing the battered Castle Black and the men who guarded it, word spread like wildfire that Viserion had been restored to life. The Black brothers, hardened as they were, stared in open wonder at the dragons flying overhead. One by one, they knelt as Daenerys and Jon passed, paying homage not just to a queen, but to the saviors who had broken the grip of a nightmare. At Winterfell, the reception was just as overwhelming. Bran, still the three-eyed raven, greeted them with a distant smile. "Viserion's path is not yet done," he said cryptically. "He is free of the Night King, but the scars will linger. You must be vigilant." Sansa and Arya stood nearby, quietly watching as the three dragons settled in the courtyard that had once been a place for swordsmen to train. The contrast was striking. The ancestral seat of House Stark, built for the cold and the pragmatic realities of the North, now served as a temporary roost for three living legends. They gathered in the Great Hall that evening, a somber yet celebratory feast held in honor of the victory. People laughed and drank, though some were still too exhausted to do more than slump at the benches, grateful simply to be alive. The mood felt lighter than it had in many moons, for the Night King, that harbinger of doom, was at last vanquished. Tyrion made a toast in his wry manner, extolling the virtues of improbable heroes, ghosts, wolves, Targaryens, and Northerners alike. Ser Davos, who had always been practical, marveled at the presence of three living dragons in the courtyard. "Never thought I'd see the day. The realm might just owe you a debt it can't repay," he said to Daenerys and Jon. Yet amid the revelry, Jon sensed a lingering tension in Daenerys. She smiled, but her eyes carried the weight of what was lost in that war. The thousands of men, women, and children who fell, the near loss of a child she had hatched from stone. Eventually, Jon found her at the far end of the hall, by the dying embers of a hearth. She offered a soft, weary smile when she saw him. "I never truly thought we could bring Viserion back," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion. "And even now I worry. Jon stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "He's alive, Dany. You saved him. You never gave up on him." Her gaze dropped to the floor for a moment. "We all did our part. You Drogon Rhaegal. I felt your words reaching out to him. I've seen you ride Rhaegal, how he accepts you. There's something about your blood, your lineage, that the dragons respond to. Without it, I'm not sure we could have ever broken the Night King's hold." Jon took a measured breath, recalling the swirl of power he had felt. "I didn't want this heritage, this name, but I think it was meant to be used for something more than just claiming a throne. Maybe it was for this moment to help save a life, save a dragon." She nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. The tension in her posture eased slightly, replaced by a quiet resolve. "He's not whole yet, but he will be. We'll nurse him, and you'll help me, won't you?" It was both a question and a statement, an invitation to share in her burden and her hope. "I'll do all I can," Jon answered. A faint smile curved Daenerys's lips. They shared a gentle silence, the flickering firelight dancing on their faces. Outside, in the courtyard, Viserion dozed fitfully between Drogon and Rhaegal. The dragons formed a triangle of scaled guardians, watching each other in an unspoken closeness. Some of the Northmen, half terrified, half awestruck, huddled in the shadows to witness such a sight. The living dragons, reunited under a single cause. In the following weeks, much had to be done. The armies that had allied against the Night King, Northerners, Vale Knights, unsullied, needed to recuperate, bury their dead, rebuild. The rumors of the victory spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The Night King was no more, his undead army vanquished. This news sparked celebration in some places, disbelief in others, and, in the south, an undercurrent of political maneuvering as various lords realized Daenerys Targaryen, with her 3 dragons, still stood as a formidable power. But in the north, at least, there was a sense of relief bordering on euphoria. For once, winter did not feel like an end but rather a season that would pass in time. Melting snow dripped from the eaves of Winterfell, and the days slowly lengthened. Jon oversaw the distribution of supplies to the battered towns and villages. Daenerys visited the wounded, offering them both royal condolences and the fierce encouragement of a warrior queen who had faced death and won. And through it all, Viserion healed. At first, he could barely move without pain, large swathes of his scales blackened or brittle. Maesters debated how to treat a dragon's wounds. Some recommended salves made from special resins or the blood of animals. Others claimed only time and a dragon's innate magic could heal such injuries. Daenerys spent hours by his side, whispering in Valyrian, feeding him morsels of charred goat that Rhaegal and Drogon hunted. Jon, too, would approach carefully, speaking softly. Over time, Viserion allowed Jon to place a hand on his muzzle. The dragon's breath was warm again, with only a faint hint of that unnatural chill. One morning, Jon awoke to the sound of resounding roars that shook the castle foundations. Alarmed, he rushed outside, expecting to find some new threat. Instead, he saw Viserion lifting off from the courtyard, wings beating the air in powerful strokes. Daenerys stood below, eyes alight with pride and tears. Drogon and Rhaegal soared nearby, their roars echoing in the crisp air. Viserion took flight with them, albeit unsteadily, testing the skies. The lords and ladies of Winterfell, the soldiers and small folk alike gathered to watch. A hush of awe fell over them, for the dragons were a legend made flesh, and now all 3 soared together, defiant and free. Jon joined Daenerys, a smile tugging at his lips. "He's flying," Jon said softly, wonder in his voice. Daenerys nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the sky. "Yes. He's still not at full strength, but it's a start." She turned to Jon, a gratitude so immense shining in her eyes that words were unnecessary. Later, as they walked through Winterfell's yard, they found themselves discussing what came next. The Iron Throne, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms, the forging of alliances, it all loomed on the horizon. But for this fleeting moment, they reveled in the knowledge that the greatest threat, the creeping horror beyond the wall, had been laid to rest. And they had achieved something that once seemed impossible, uniting all living dragons, including the one cruelly taken by the Night King. Whispers traveled far and wide about this miracle. There were those in the southern courts who dismissed it as exaggeration, claiming the Targaryen queen must have some new necromantic power. Others speculated that Jon Snow was the second coming of Azor Ahai, forging light out of darkness. Some fantasized that the dragons, once so fearsome, were now gentle guardians of humankind. Of course, the truth was far more complicated. Viserion's scars ran deep and the memory of ice and death lingered. Sometimes at night, he would roar at phantom terrors, belching flame that flickered blue at the edges. Drogon and Rhaegal would gather around him, calm him, remind him of the living warmth of their bond. Jon, too, sensed that the victory had not come without cost. As the weeks turned to months, he found himself wondering about the nature of destiny. If the threat of the Night King had bound him to Daenerys and these dragons, what awaited them now that the threat was gone? Could the realm unite under a Targaryen queen without fracturing once more into petty power struggles? Could the North truly accept her, or even him if he claimed the Targaryen name? But one crisp morning, as he stood atop the walls of Winterfell, he watched the trio of dragons swoop overhead in an aerial dance of pure joy. Their roars rumbled across the frosted fields, sending herds of sheep scattering. A grin spread unbidden across Jon's face. The sight resonated with him. For all his life, he had felt like an outsider, bastard, brother of the Night's Watch, king in the north, and now Targaryen heir. Yet in the presence of these majestic creatures, he sensed a unity. Something transcendent. The old grudges of houses and the ephemeral squabbles over titles seemed small in comparison. He descended the steps and made his way to the Godwood, where he found Daenerys standing by the heart tree. Red leaves fluttered around her, caught in a gentle breeze. She turned at his approach, wearing a cloak of thick white fur. The serenity on her face surprised him. This was not the conquering dragon queen nor the heartbroken mother. This was simply a woman pondering the mysteries of the world. "They're beautiful," she said softly, inclining her head in the direction of the dragons overhead. Jon nodded. "Aye, they are. Seems a lifetime ago when I first saw Drogon beyond the narrow sea." She smiled, remembering. "I used to think they were the last dragons in the world, that fate had chosen me to bring them back and rid the world of tyrants. Now I see, maybe it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us." Jon stepped beside her, looking up at the ancient weirwood tree. Its carved face gazed impassively at them. He recalled how the children of the forest once claimed that the weirwoods could see deep into people's hearts. "We united them," Jon said, gesturing with a nod toward the sky. "You're dragons. Our dragons. They follow you and they trust me. It still feels improbable." She turned, meeting his eyes. "You brought Viserion back to me," she said, voice trembling with sincerity. "I lost him once, and it felt like I'd lost a piece of my own soul. But because of you, of your determination, he lives again. You are as much his savior as I am." Jon looked away, unsure how to respond. "Couldn't have done it alone," he managed. "It took all of us. Your bond, my heritage, the loyalty of Drogon and Rhaegal. Even the magic in our blood, I suppose. None of it would have mattered if you didn't love him so fiercely." She reached out and took his hand, her touch warm despite the chill air. "If the realm can see past fear, past petty rivalries, perhaps we can build something new. A kingdom guided by unity instead of fear. The living overcame the dead. What challenge could be greater than that?" Jon tilted his head in agreement. "We have to try." They lapsed into a comfortable silence. Overhead, the dragons circled again, a choreography of beating wings and shimmering scales. The morning light kissed Viserion's hide, which had begun to regrow patches of healthy coloration alongside the frost-scarred areas. It wasn't a perfect restoration, but it was enough to confirm that life had triumphed. Over the following days, word came from the south. Some lords pledged fealty to Daenerys, others hesitated. The political machinery of Westeros churned, but crucially, there was no immediate threat of civil war. Most recognized that it had been Daenerys and Jon who liberated the realm from the undead onslaught. The war-weary populace craved peace. A contingent from the Iron Islands arrived, bearing messages from Yara Greyjoy, who offered an alliance. Even Dorne, which had long stood apart, sent a delegation to parley, curious about the queen who had ended the threat beyond the wall. Through it all, the three dragons soared above Winterfell, an awe-inspiring reminder of what had been achieved. The Northmen, once fearful and aloof, grew used to their presence, marveling at the warm rush of air when Drogon snorted or the shimmering reflection of sunlight off Rhaegal's emerald scales. They still approached Viserion with caution, uncertain about his scars, but the more adventurous children would peer from behind the walls, giggling when he let out a playful rumble that shook the snow from branches. When the time came for Jon and Daenerys to consider the next steps, whether to march south, to accept formal coronation, or to maintain a seat in the north, they did so with a sense of deliberation rather than desperation. Tyrion advised them on the intricacies of dealing with the lords of Westeros. Sansa, equally adept, provided counsel on the temperament of the north. The entire realm, it seemed, hung in the balance. But they had proven one thing beyond doubt: the living, when united by a common cause, could achieve miracles. Of course, peace never remains unchallenged in Westeros. Rumors of disgruntled lords of shadowy schemes to undermine Daenerys' authority circulated. But the difference now was that many hearts had turned toward hope. The battered, weary folk had endured the long night, had witnessed the near apocalypse. Compared to an army of the dead led by a fallen dragon, political intrigue seemed almost manageable. On a crisp afternoon, while Jon was in the practice yard overseeing drills, he heard the thunder of wings above. Drogon and Regal soared overhead, flanking Viserion, who was flying more strongly than ever before. Daenerys stood near the gate, a rare smile lighting her face. Jon paused his instruction of the soldiers to watch. The dragons looked so natural together, as if no darkness had ever separated them. He felt a presence beside him. It was Arya, her stance poised and alert. She said nothing for a moment, merely observed the flying behemoths. When she finally spoke, her voice was tinged with wonder. "You did it, Jon. You truly saved him. Saved all of us." "Not me alone," he said softly, but he appreciated the sentiment. Arya's steel-gray eyes flicked over to him. "Still, you risked everything. I suppose we Starks aren't half bad at improbable odds. Next time someone doubts you, you can remind them you fought the dead and won." Jon couldn't help a small, wry chuckle. "If there's one thing I've learned, Arya, it's that there's always another fight on the horizon. But for once, we can enjoy this victory." She nodded, glancing again at the dragons. "You deserve happiness, Jon. You've earned it." Then she slipped away, quick and silent as ever. Jon watched his sister depart, a warmth growing in his chest. He hadn't the words to express the gratitude he felt, that she was alive, that the dead were gone, that a future lay open before them. Sometimes he would catch himself feeling the old weight of the world on his shoulders, and then he'd remember the image of Viserion, once enslaved by the Night King, flying free against a clear winter sky. If such a redemption was possible, then maybe the realm could find its own redemption, too. He recognized that the future was not without challenges. People would always fear dragons, rightfully so. Rival claimants or rebellious houses might rise up, seeing vulnerabilities or doubting Daenerys' rule. The scars of the war with the dead would linger, in nightmares and lost loved ones, in villages scorched and homes destroyed. But in that moment, standing in Winterfell's courtyard, with the sun shining and the three dragons weaving patterns of living flame in the sky, Jon believed that hope could endure. He walked to the ramparts, gazing out over the snow-dusted expanse that stretched beyond the castle walls. The knowledge that the Night King's specter no longer haunted the horizon filled him with a cautious optimism. Turning back, he saw Daenerys ascending the stone steps toward him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes alight with excitement. "Viserion's flight grows stronger each day," she said. "He's eager to test the winds farther south, but for now I want him near us, near his family." Jon smiled, opening his fur-lined cloak slightly so she could stand beside him against the cold. She nestled close, and for a moment they simply stood there, watching the dragons. He felt the rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her body. A sweet ache of contentment fluttered in his chest. "They're united," he murmured half to himself. "All three. I never thought I'd see the day." She lifted her gaze to him, that small, rare smile returning. "Nor I. But perhaps that's what this war has taught us, never doubt the impossible, especially when you have faith, determination, and love." Jon's hand found hers. They stood in silence, an unspoken agreement passing between them that whatever trials came next, political or otherwise, they would face together, backed by three living dragons. The memory of the Night King's hold on Viserion would forever be a reminder of the darkness that once threatened. But that darkness had been beaten back by the light of unity and the power of an unbreakable bond. Somewhere in the swirling currents of the wind carried on the dragon's roars was the promise that life had overcome death. In that promise, there was a spark of renewal. A new dawn for the North, for House Targaryen, and for all the people who dared to hope. The echoes of Viserion's piercing shriek under the Night King's thrall would remain in memory, but it was replaced now by the triumphant roar of a dragon set free, a roar that signaled a future shaped not by icy terror, but by the flame of rebirth and the unbreakable will of the living. In the days that followed, the North basked in a peace it hadn't truly known in living memory. The specter of the undead, once an ever-present terror, had receded into the annals of history, stories told around hearthfires by men and women still shaking off the nightmares. Winterfell, though marked by scars of battle and haunted by the losses endured, began to exude cautious hope. Repairs went on day and night. Carpenters replaced scorched timbers, stoneworkers patched up the broken ramparts, and the courtyard filled with the bustle of new arrivals seeking safety or pledging loyalty. All the while, three dragons soared in the skies, casting vast shadows that reminded every soul below of the precarious balance between awe and fear. Viserion still bore visible marks of his ordeal, a faint pallor lingered around the edges of his wings, and sometimes, if the weather turned especially cold, one could see traces of frosty breath coiling from his nostrils. But day by day, his flight grew more assured. He could climb as high as Regal and Drogon without faltering, and his roars, once tinged with a hollow, eerie echo, now boomed with healthy vigor. When he breathed fire, its hue was back to an almost pure orange red, though keen observers noticed flecks of blue dancing at the margins like stubborn ghosts reluctant to depart. Daenerys ensured that each evening, after the day's labors and formalities, she visited the dragons. She would stand between Drogon and Regal, whisper words of comfort to Viserion, and feed them with help from stable hands brave enough to approach. The townsfolk looked on from a safe distance, murmuring among themselves that never had a Targaryen queen been so close to her scaled children, nor had a realm teetered between ruin and deliverance so dramatically. Mothers clutched babes who stared wide-eyed at the serpentine shapes wheeling overhead, uncertain whether to quake with dread or squeal in wonder. Jon found himself roped into 1,000 logistical concerns. Winter might have relented slightly in the north, but it had hardly withdrawn entirely. There were stockpiles to manage, roads to clear, letters to dispatch. He went about these tasks methodically, unwilling to shirk his duty after so many had died. Often, as he wandered the corridors, men and women alike would bow or curtsy, calling him "My Lord" or "Your Grace." Jon corrected them each time, insisting he was no king now, only someone determined to see the realm healed. But they remembered how he had flown alongside Daenerys, wielded Valyrian steel against the Night King, and, crucially, brought Viserion back from a fate worse than death. To many in the north, those acts formed a legend impossible to ignore. Sansa Stark took on more responsibilities in stewarding Winterfell, her pragmatic mind well-suited to the complexities of governance. Along with Tyrion and Ser Davos, she coordinated supply lines from the Vale, the Riverlands, and even the Iron Islands, where Yara Greyjoy, newly ascendant, had sent fishing vessels loaded with salted cod and herring. Sansa and Arya grew closer again, bound by the knowledge they had both survived unimaginable horrors. Bran, ever enigmatic, glided through the castle's daily life like a ghost. Sometimes he would make cryptic remarks about times long past, as though he were only half present in the here and now. Yet when Daenerys or Jon needed some glimpse of the realm's shape, letters gone astray, armies on the march, Bran provided uncanny insight. In quiet moments, Jon would join Daenerys in the Godwood. Though it was a sacred Stark place, Daenerys found the Weirwood's atmosphere strangely comforting. She'd stand beneath the rustling red leaves, absorbing the hush of the ancient space. Jon sensed she needed that tranquility, a counterbalance to her draconic identity and the swirling ambitions that still gnawed at her. Even after delivering the world from the Night King, Daenerys remained the breaker of chains, the would-be queen who had crossed a sea to claim her birthright. The threat of the dead was gone, but now the threat of politics loomed as large as any monstrous horde. One cold morning, a raven arrived from King's Landing. Winterfell's great hall grew hushed as Tyrion read its contents aloud. It bore the seal of the Red Keep, pressed into crimson wax. The message was succinct and tinged with challenge. Queen Cersei Lannister, having learned of the Night King's fall and the reemergence of a third dragon, demanded an audience in the capital. She wished, it said, to negotiate terms of peace and delineate the boundaries of power going forward. A hush fell upon the gathered lords, knights, and counselors. Some instantly dismissed it as a trap. Others advised ignoring Cersei altogether, letting her fester in the south while the north consolidated its own position. Yet Tyrion's brow remained furrowed. He knew his sister too well. Cersei might be cornered, but she was never powerless. If left unchecked, she could spark fresh hostilities, or worse, ally with other malcontents. Daenerys studied the letter, her fingers grazing the edges of the parchment, as if she could divine the truth behind the words. She extends an invitation, but we all know her methods, she said. If we ride south, we risk stepping into her web. If we refuse, she'll proclaim we fear her might, sowing doubt among the lords who remain unaligned. Tyrion nodded, lines of worry etched deeper into his face. I can't speak for her current state of mind, but if she's still as cunning as I remember, she'll have some plan. Possibly she means to stall us, to glean intelligence, or to exploit any sign of weakness. Ser Davos cleared his throat. We have 3 dragons, he said quietly, and the loyalty of half the realm. Cersei might still have the gold from Highgarden, and perhaps the Golden Company if rumors are true. She might try to lure us in. But if she does, well... He left the words hanging, the implication clear. Dragons could end a siege swiftly, as they had proved in Essos and elsewhere. Jon cast a glance around the room. Grey Worm stood off to the side, rigid and silent. Yet the flicker in his eyes spoke volumes of his readiness to march on any foe Daenerys commanded him against. Arya, leaning against a pillar, wore her typical half-smile as though unimpressed by all the talk of cunning queens and political maneuvers. Sansa sat near the head of the table, her posture composed, her eyes on Daenerys and Jon both. Finally, Jon spoke. "We can't simply ignore her. If we claim to be protectors of all the realms of men, if that's truly what we want, then we have to acknowledge the seat of the Seven Kingdoms. But we do so carefully. We bring enough forces to show her we won't be bullied, yet not so many that we leave the north unguarded." Daenerys leaned forward, her voice turning resolute. "We will go south. We'll present ourselves as victors of the Great War, not braggarts, but saviors who carry the scars and the burdens of it." She paused, looking at Tyrion. "You know Cersei best. Will she truly parley in good faith?" Tyrion exhaled slowly. "She'll parley so long as she sees advantage in it. The moment advantage tips out of her favor, she'll lash out or withdraw. We must be prepared for duplicity. But yes, a meeting is our best chance to prevent more bloodshed." That set their course. Over the next fortnight, ravens were sent throughout the north and beyond, announcing that the king in the north, though Jon denied the title, the name stuck, and the Targaryen queen would journey south to discuss peace terms with Cersei Lannister. Lords from the Vale and Riverlands were invited to join, to bear witness and ensure fairness. Warriors who had survived the long night were mustered once more, though many were weary of marching again so soon. The dragons inevitably would fly overhead, a living testament to the power that now resided in the north. Viserion, Drogon, and Rhaegal seemed restless at the prospect of a long journey. They felt the shift in the air, the tension that accompanied the possibility of confrontation. Daenerys spent long hours preparing them, whispering reassurances, making certain that Viserion could handle the warmer climes of the south without aggravating his frost-scarred wings. The north gossiped in hushed tones. Would the dragons simply burn King's Landing? Could they smash the Red Keep to rubble at a whim? Many still remembered the cautionary tales of the Dance of the Dragons, how Targaryens turning upon one another had once nearly torn the realm apart. But this time, it was said, the dragons were united. On a crisp morning, with the sun just cresting the distant hills, the caravan departed Winterfell. Daenerys and Jon led the column, each mounted on a sturdy northern horse. At times, they might have flown, but the decision had been made to travel partly by land to avoid the appearance of a conqueror swooping in from above. Overhead, Rhaegal and Drogon circled lazily, occasionally landing to scrounge for game in the fields. Viserion, still building his stamina, glided with them for stretches, then chose to rest. The bond between the three dragons had grown stronger since the battle against the Night King, but it was plain to any observer that Drogon was still the largest and fiercest, with Rhaegal and Viserion slightly smaller but no less formidable. Sansa remained at Winterfell to oversee affairs, along with Bran, who rarely traveled anymore. Arya joined the march, though she kept to herself, slipping in and out of the encampment with the uncanny stealth that made even seasoned soldiers uneasy. Grey Worm commanded the unsullied contingent, formed of the hardened survivors of the long night. Knights of the Vale under Lord Royce rode alongside them, their banners snapping in the cold wind. Mixed among the men-at-arms were a few freed folk from beyond the wall, tall, wild men who had pledged themselves to Jon Snow after he had saved them from annihilation. Day by day, they made their way south, feeling the air grow milder. Snowdrifts shrank, patches of green began to peek through the thinning slush. Villagers gathered along the roads to watch the procession. Some knelt, others simply stared in wonder at the dragons overhead. The reputation of Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow had taken on an almost mythic quality, the Queen of Dragons who had crossed the sea to save Westeros and the northern hero who had once been Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. They seemed less like mere mortals and more like living symbols of a miracle that had prevented the endless night. At Mo Cailin, they paused. The ancient stronghold, ruined by centuries of conflict, now served as a checkpoint for all traffic between the north and the rest of the realm. Jon recalled how he had first glimpsed it as a boy, how the boggy swamps and half-fallen towers had exuded an aura of ancient gloom. Now, however, the presence of dragons perched on the crumbling walls gave the place a surreal grandeur. Soldiers loyal to House Stark manned the defenses. They cheered their liege lord's passage and gazed open-mouthed at Daenerys, who rode at Jon's side. They pressed on. Little by little, the land turned greener, the air less biting. Patches of wildflowers emerged. By the time they reached the neck, some of the Unsullied had to remove layers of furs more accustomed to warmth than the Northerners were. Daenerys, though raised partly in cold climates of Essos during her travels, still found the moderate spring of the southern territories welcome compared to the biting chill of the north. Viserion likewise seemed to flourish, stretching his wings under the milder sun. The injuries from his resurrection continued healing, and his once frosted scales gleamed with renewed sheen, though faint scars and discoloration remained. While encamped near an old watchtower, Jon and Daenerys convened with Tyrion, Davos, and Grey Worm inside a large command tent. Maps of the Crownlands were spread across a wooden table. Tyrion tapped a finger on King's Landing's outline. Cersei will likely have closed the gates to all but essential traffic. She'll keep us guessing, deciding at the last moment whether to admit us under a flag of truce or force us to camp outside the city walls. In either case, expect every Lannister loyalist to line the battlements. Grey Worm's expression was stone. If it's a trap, we will fight our way out. Daenerys nodded, her voice calm but brimming with an undercurrent of iron. I have no wish to bathe King's Landing in dragon fire. We all saw what the dead left in their wake. But I will not be cowed. If she attempts treachery, we will respond with overwhelming force. Jon watched the interplay, remembering the days when the threat beyond the wall had dwarfed all else. Now it was back to the old Game of Thrones, subterfuge, alliances, betrayals. Part of him longed for a simpler world, one where he could remain in the north, free from the tangles of southern courts. Yet he knew that if they wanted lasting peace, they had to engage with these very complexities. We should make a show of unity, he said. We'll ride in together, with the dragons visible but not attacking. Let the city see we come in good faith. Let them also see we aren't afraid. Tyrion allowed a small, wry smile. A delicate balance. But that's our best chance. I'll do my best to interpret my sister's moods. The question is, do we trust the Golden Company to stand aside if Cersei orders them to fight? Ser Davos let out a gruff sigh. Paid swords fight if they're paid well enough. But they have no loyalty beyond coin. If they see dragons, if they sense the tide turning, they might not be eager to die on her behalf. With the plan set, they continued onward. Their numbers swelled as they approached the Riverlands, where the Tully bannermen mustered small contingents, though many were still recovering from the wars of recent years. Some came out of respect for House Stark or House Targaryen. Others simply followed out of curiosity. By the time they reached the vicinity of Harrenhal, an entire cavalcade trailed behind them, forming a ragged parade of knights, foot soldiers, merchants, and small folk. Harrenhal's ruins cast a formidable silhouette. The charred towers stood as testament to Aegon the Conqueror's wrath centuries before, when dragonfire had melted stone walls. Daenerys lingered, gazing upon the melted parapets. She touched a wall where the blackened rock was still shaped like molten wax. This was where my ancestors displayed the power of dragons, she murmured, her voice echoing in the wind. It brought many houses to heal. But it also sowed fear. I wonder if the fear ever truly left. Jon rested a hand on her shoulder. Fear is easy to spread. Trust is harder to build. That's why we have to tread carefully. She nodded, a pensive look crossing her features. The presence of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion overhead drew sharp contrasts to the burned remains of Harrenhal. It was as if the ghosts of the past were meeting the possibilities of the future. 3 days later, they stood on a rise overlooking the Blackwater Rush, the wide river that flowed toward King's Landing. Word arrived that Cersei had indeed withdrawn her troops into the city and closed all external gates except for the Iron Gate near the river. However, a small retinue of Lannister knights had emerged under a white banner, offering guidance on how the visitors were to approach. Tyrion read the message with a bemused expression. She's dictating the route, he said, likely so she can control how many of our forces can enter at once. I suspect she'll allow only a small honor guard inside the walls. Daenerys listened, her jaw tightening. She turned to Jon. It's a risk, but if we force our entire army in, there will be bloodshed. We'll go with a small party, our best negotiators, and our personal guards. The rest can camp nearby, within sight of the city. Jon agreed. Grey Worm can position the Unsullied along the roads. The dragons, he paused, glancing at the skies. They'll be with us, but perhaps on the outskirts, enough to remind Cersei we're not defenseless, but not so close that we appear to threaten immediate destruction. Tyrion exhaled, an anxious glimmer in his eyes. I'll accompany you inside. She's less likely to do something rash if I'm present, if only because she'll want the satisfaction of trying to sway me back or insult me to my face. So it was decided. The next morning, with dawn's light gilding the river, they advanced. King's Landing came into view, sprawling beyond its high walls, the Red Keep perched on a rocky promontory. Smoke from countless chimneys drifted skyward. The city looked peaceful from a distance, but a keen tension underlay the sight. As they neared the main road leading to the gates, they could see Lannister soldiers arrayed atop the ramparts, their crimson cloaks billowing. Banners bearing the Golden Lion fluttered in the breeze. Daenerys and Jon rode at the head of a small group, Tyrion, Davos, Arya, Grey Worm, Missandei, who had insisted on standing by Daenerys' side, and a dozen trusted knights. Further back, a contingent of Unsullied awaited orders, flanked by Knights of the Vale and other loyal bannermen. Far overhead, the dragons circled, occasionally swooping low enough that even from the city walls, one could hear the thunder of their wings. In the crowd that gathered outside the gates, small folk, merchants, curious onlookers, nervous murmurs spread. They had heard tales of dragons scorching battlefields across the narrow sea, and now 3 living beasts soared above their capital. At last, a trumpeter on the battlements signaled, and the massive gates groaned open. A single Lannister herald stepped forward, flanked by knights bearing spears. The herald's voice rang out, "By order of Her Grace, Queen Cersei Lannister, the visiting party may enter under a banner of peace. None but the named individuals and a guard of 10. All others must remain without." Jon exchanged a look with Daenerys. She inclined her head, indicating her acceptance. Grey Worm selected 10 of the most disciplined Unsullied to accompany them, while Tyrion and Davos joined as well. Arya was set to remain behind, at least that was what Daenerys and Jon had requested, but Arya slipped into the group so deftly that they only realized it once they were within the gate. She offered them a half-smirk that brooked no argument. Missandei also remained at Daenerys' side, her chin lifted in defiance of the Lannister soldiers' stares. They rode in slowly, hooves clopping on the cobblestones of King's Landing. The city's streets were lined with silent onlookers, many of them gaunt from the recent harsh winter and ongoing privations. Some shops seemed shuttered, and tension lay thick in the air. Soldiers in red cloaks watched from every corner, crossbows at the ready. Above, the walls of the city rose, and behind them, the sprawl of rooftops that rolled up toward the Red Keep's towers. Jon felt a pang, recalling how once he had approached King's Landing as a young boy from the north, an outsider in a place of intrigue and bright illusions. Now he returned not as a mere visitor, but as someone who had looked death itself in the eyes and survived. He could sense Daenerys' tension beside him. She sat tall in her saddle, exuding regal composure, yet the set of her jaw betrayed her apprehension. They passed the remnants of the dragon pit looming on a distant hill, half-ruined after centuries of neglect, a monument to House Targaryen's once absolute hold over the realm. At length, they arrived at the courtyard before the Red Keep. Lannister guards stepped aside, forming a narrow passage leading up the steps. The heavy doors swung open, and there stood Cersei Lannister herself, draped in a black gown adorned with golden filigree. Beside her stood Qyburn, his face impassive, and behind them a scattering of courtiers and knights. The Hound lurked to one side, half his scarred face in shadow, ignoring Arya's sharp look as she spotted him. The Mountain was absent, rumor having it he was patrolling the dungeons or engaged in other menacing tasks. Cersei's gaze swept over Daenerys and Jon, lingering with cold appraisal. Her lips curled in something approximating a smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "It's been some time since King's Landing hosted such august company." Daenerys dismounted, handing her reins to a waiting groom. She stepped forward, chin raised. Jon mirrored her movements, coming to stand beside her. Tyrion hung back slightly, eyes flicking between his sister and the assembled Lannister guards. Cersei's gaze flicked to Daenerys' silver-gold hair and the embroidered dragons on her coat. "The Dragon Queen returns triumphant. And how fortunate that you ended the northern threat so swiftly. One might wonder why it took you so long." A tense silence followed. Then Daenerys answered in a voice measured yet firm, "The threat beyond the wall cost tens of thousands of lives. It was no small victory." Cersei's eyes then fell upon Jon. "And the bastard of Winterfell? Or is it king in the north? Or shall I call you a Targaryen prince now? The rumors do run rampant." Jon felt a flicker of anger but held it in check. "Jon Snow will suffice," he said coolly. "We've come to ensure peace for the realm." Cersei spread her hands in a graceful arch. "Peace, yes. That elusive notion we all claim to desire. And yet, I see you've brought armies, dragons, and half the north to my doorstep. Hardly the gesture of those who trust in words alone. It was Tyrion who interjected, his tone clipped. You'd hardly expect us to come unguarded, sister, given your history. Her eyes narrowed at the word sister, but she recovered quickly, turning her attention once more to Daenerys. Let us retire to the throne room. We have much to discuss, if we're to come to terms. Together, they ascended the steps, leaving the stony courtyard behind. The throne room was dimly lit, tall columns running down its length. Shafts of sunlight pierced the windows set high in the walls. At the far end stood the Iron Throne, forged from 1,000 swords. Cersei took her seat there, regal and cool. Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, and Davos positioned themselves a short distance away, flanked by the Unsullied Guard. Arya lingered near a pillar, ready to vanish into the shadows at a moment's notice. Cersei studied them from atop the throne. She made no move to dismiss her own knights, who lined the walls, hands on their weapons. Qyburn hovered at her shoulder, ever the silent advisor. The tension was thick enough to taste. Jon could hear the distant caw of gulls outside, a strangely mundane sound in the midst of all this. Cersei broke the silence. You've dealt with the Night King, so I hear. Vanquished him, destroyed his army. The realm owes you gratitude, or so some say. And yet, do you intend to sit upon the Iron Throne next, Daenerys Targaryen? Or you, Jon Snow? I wonder why the North has marched south, if not for conquest. Daenerys clasped her hands before her. My claim is not a secret. By birth, I have the right to the throne my ancestors built. But my purpose is greater than crowns. I came to save Westeros from annihilation, and I succeeded at great cost. Now, I wish to ensure no one else need die in a pointless war. If the realm can be united peacefully, if we can rebuild, that is all I desire. Cersei's lips quirked in a mirthless smile. So you say. Yet your family's motto is fire and blood, is it not? Daenerys stiffened, but Jon spoke before she could reply. Fire for the undead, he said, and blood spilled to protect the living. That debt is paid. We come offering peace, not subjugation. Cersei drummed her fingers on the arm of the throne. You speak as though you bear no ambition, Jon Snow. But I've heard whispers of your parentage, of your bond with the dragons. And I have not forgotten how the North bent the knee once before. Do you intend to keep it bent this time? His jaw tightened, memories flashing, the day he had first pledged fealty to Daenerys, believing in her cause. He paused, exchanging a look with Daenerys. The North stands with Queen Daenerys because we believe in her. The question is whether you, Cersei Lannister, will stand against her or join in forging a lasting peace. A soft hiss of breath escaped Cersei's lips. Her gaze flicked to Tyrion. He's learned to speak in riddles, has he not? Much like you, dear brother. Very well. Let us consider this peace. What do you propose? That I simply lay down my arms, welcome your dragons, and name Daenerys Targaryen my rightful queen? Daenerys answered carefully, I propose that we end the hostilities. That you recognize my claim to the throne, and in return, the realm's resources, food, trade, stability will flow. The city will prosper under a united crown with no further bloodshed. A murmur went through the gathered courtiers. Cersei's face hardened. So I am to be replaced in an instant. My armies, my crown, my sacrifices meaningless if I relinquish power so easily. Tyrion cleared his throat. You would be recognized as Lady of the Westerlands with your lands and titles intact. House Lannister would remain a great house under the Iron Throne. You'd lose none of your wealth, nor your life, nor your legacy. Cersei's eyes snapped to him. You think I care for gold or trade pacts? I fought for my children, for my family. My children are gone. My brothers betrayed me. My father was murdered on the privy. I stand alone. All I have is my crown. Her voice trembled with barely suppressed fury. You want me to hand it over to a foreign invader who rode in with armies of Unsullied and Dothraki hordes? Tell me, dear brother, why should I comply? The tension rose palpably. Lannister guards shifted and the Unsullied gripped their spears. Daenerys inhaled slowly, reining in her temper. Jon remembered, with a shiver, how once Daenerys' anger had flared in battle, unleashing Drogon's fire. He silently prayed she'd keep her composure now. Daenerys spoke in a measured tone. Because if you do not, there will be war. Not a war I desire, but one I will fight if cornered. And if it comes to that, you know your armies cannot stand against 3 dragons and the combined might of the North, the Vale, Dorne, the Iron Islands, and the Riverlands. Our alliances grow by the day. You have the Golden Company, perhaps, but Sellsword's break when faced with overwhelming odds. And I do not wish to burn King's Landing. I have come here personally to prevent that outcome. Cersei's gaze flicked to Jon. And you, King in the North, will you burn the city as well? Jon shook his head firmly. No, we've seen enough devastation. But the realm won't accept a divided monarchy any longer. Too much blood has been shed. We came here so we wouldn't have to shed more. But if you refuse, if you threaten the peace, we won't back down. She laughed then, a brittle, mirthless sound. It seems my choices are death or surrender. At least you're honest about it. Silence fell, broken only by the distant footsteps of guards shifting in the hall. No one dared speak. Finally, Cersei let out a slow breath and rose from the Iron Throne, stepping down the few steps until she stood at eye level with Daenerys. The two queens faced each other, a hair's breadth of space between them. Cersei studied Daenerys's face, perhaps searching for any sign of weakness. Then she said, if I were to bend the knee, to renounce all claim to the Iron Throne, I would expect your sworn oath that House Lannister retains the Westerlands and that my life, not just my lands, would be spared. The same for my loyal retainers. I will not see them cast aside as traitors. Daenerys inclined her head. Agreed. House Lannister shall remain the paramount house of the Westerlands, and those who served you faithfully will not be punished for loyalty, so long as they bend the knee to the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei arched an eyebrow. Rifle in your eyes, yes? Then, before anyone could blink, she dropped to one knee. The Lannister guards shifted in shock, but none intervened. The courtiers gasped. Tyrion's eyes widened and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Cersei's face was a mask of resignation and simmering anger. I, Cersei of House Lannister, do hereby renounce all claim to the Iron Throne and name Daenerys of House Targaryen as Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, protector of the realm. Daenerys's lips parted in surprise. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. Then she said quietly, Rise, my lady. Cersei stood, her gaze burning with an intensity that made it clear she had not truly been cowed. You have your peace, she said in a low voice. For now. A stark hush followed. Jon looked to Daenerys, who lifted her chin and addressed the hall. Let all here bear witness. The war for the throne is ended. Let the realm be made whole. I ask only for your allegiance so we might rebuild together. The Lannister courtiers exchanged uncertain glances. Some knelt immediately, relieved that no blood would be spilled. Others hesitated, clinging to old loyalties. But faced with no other avenue, one by one, they bent the knee. The thud of knees hitting the stone floor echoed in the cavernous throne room, a gesture of submission that felt monumental. Tyrion closed his eyes, exhaling relief. Davos gave a silent nod of approval. Arya folded her arms, unimpressed but satisfied that no immediate violence would erupt. That evening, the gates of King's Landing were opened. The Targaryen banners were raised alongside the Lannister lion on the battlements. Cersei's own guards patrolled side by side with the Unsullied. Tense as it was, it marked the first time in recent memory that peace might truly hold. Cersei withdrew to her chambers, refusing to take part in any celebratory feast. Daenerys, wanting to avoid provoking her further, didn't press the matter. Instead, she and Jon oversaw the arrival of their retinue into the city, ensuring no soldier misbehaved or ignited hostilities in the cramped streets. Tyrion took charge of organizing a grand assembly the following morning, where local lords, merchants, and guild leaders would formally recognize Daenerys' reign. As darkness settled, Arya wandered the city's back alleys, reacquainting herself with the place where she had once been a child longing to wield a sword. She found the Hound leaning against a wall near an alehouse, sullenly watching passers-by. Their eyes met. You're still too stubborn to die, she said, arms crossed. He spat on the ground. Same to you, girl. They exchanged a look of grudging respect, then parted without another word. Within the Red Keep, Daenerys paced the corridors, feeling the looming weight of history bearing down on her. She passed tapestries depicting old kings and queens, storied battles, and finally, she emerged onto a balcony that overlooked the Blackwater Bay. Jon stood there, gazing out at the dark waters glimmering under moonlight. Far below, the city's lights flickered like fireflies. The faint roar of dragons carried on the breeze. She joined him, leaning on the stone balustrade. I half expected her to refuse, Daenerys murmured, to force our hand in bloodshed. Jon nodded. She may yet. She bent the knee, but I sensed no genuine loyalty. Daenerys sighed. No, none at all. But it's done. The realm is at peace, at least for now. We can begin to rebuild. Jon let out a breath he'd been holding. Rebuild the realm. And what of us? The North? Your seat on the throne. She studied his face, illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. We'll do it together, if you're willing. I know your heart, Jon. You never asked to be a Targaryen prince or a king, but you've proven yourself a leader, someone the realm trusts. If it's your wish to remain in the North, to be Warden of the North, I'll grant you that. If you wish to stand beside me in King's Landing, that too is your choice. He turned, placing his hand over hers on the balustrade. I want what's best for our people, for you and the North and all those who suffered. There's a lot to mend. We'll figure out the rest as we go. She slipped her hand free, only to intertwine her fingers with his. The quiet warmth of that gesture spoke more than words. They stood like that for a time, letting the wind and the distant sound of city life wash over them. Morning brought an air of ceremony to the capital. Trumpets sounded, banners unfurled. Daenerys was to stand before the assembled crowd in the Red Keep's courtyard, reaffirming her new status as the realm's protector and queen. Jon, Tyrion, Davos, and Grey Worm would flank her, while the local lords of the Crownlands observed. Thousands of small folk thronged the streets, eager for a glimpse of the Dragon Queen who had saved them from the Night King. Above, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion soared in wide circles, their silhouettes majestic against the pale sky. Cersei appeared at the ceremony as well, escorted by Lannister guards, though she stood to the side, silent and cold. Some watchers whispered that they had never seen her so subdued. Others suspected she merely bided her time, plotting vengeance. Daenerys, for her part, made no gesture of triumph toward the dethroned queen. She gave an address, speaking of unity and renewal, calling upon all houses to lay down grudges and strive for a realm where children could grow without fear of undead or dragonfire. The small folk, who had weathered more wars than they could count, listened with cautious hope. They roared their approval at the mention of peace. They shouted Daenerys' name, many having already decided she was the living embodiment of the realm's salvation. News of the final victory over the Night King had circulated widely, accompanied by the near-mythic tale that one of her dragons had been taken, then freed by the combined efforts of the North and the Targaryen bloodline. It sounded like a fable, but the living proof soared in the skies above. Later in the day, a makeshift court was held in the Red Keep's audience chamber. Lords and knights who had once pledged to the Lannisters came forward to offer their renewed fealty. Some gave half-hearted oaths, clearly uncertain of what their new queen might demand of them. But Daenerys was gracious, forgiving. She reiterated that those who turned their banners in peace would not be punished. A few brought forward gifts, chests of gold, bolts of rare silk, or spices from distant lands. Jon stood by, inwardly marveling at the sudden shift from the raw horror of the long night to this display of finery and wealth. The realm had many faces indeed. Over the following weeks, a steady rhythm established itself. Daenerys issued proclamations from the throne, abolishing any last vestiges of tyranny she found in the city's laws, particularly those persecuting the poor. She tasked Tyrion with reorganizing the governance structure, ensuring that each region's voice was heard in council. She consulted Davos on shipping routes, trade pacts, and the distribution of resources to the battered north. Jon spent time among the city watch, gleaning how order was kept in such a massive urban sprawl. He recognized that if they truly meant to unify the realm, they had to prove that King's Landing could be a fair seat for all, not just a den of intrigue. All the while, the dragons roamed, sometimes hunting beyond the city walls, sometimes perching on the old Targaryen structures that dotted the capital's hills. Rhaegal and Drogon took well to the warmer climate, basking in the southern sun. Viserion, still healing, occasionally let out a low croon as if uncertain about this land. Yet with each passing day, the city grew less terrified of him. They knew his story, how he had once been lost to the Night King and then redeemed. Children, perched on their parents' shoulders, would watch him pass overhead and exclaim that he was proof that even the dead could be saved. Tension still simmered, of course. Rumors that Cersei plotted in secret to poison Daenerys or to reignite a civil war abounded. The uneasy truce between House Lannister and the new Targaryen monarchy held by the thinnest of threads. Tyrion spent hours investigating any sign of treachery, employing Varys' old network of whisperers, what remained of it, to keep an eye on the corridors of the Red Keep. Arya prowled in the shadows as well, though she kept her intentions quiet. If anyone made a move on Jon or Daenerys, she intended to be the knife in the dark that prevented tragedy. Once, late at night, Daenerys wandered to the courtyard where the Targaryen dragon skulls had once been displayed. She found it mostly empty. Many of the relics had been moved or destroyed by the Lannisters long ago. Only a few fragments remained, a jawbone here, a spinal ridge there, blackened by time. She knelt and ran her hand over the fragments, reflecting on how her ancestors had once ruled with fire and fear. It must be different this time, she whispered to the dark. She started when a voice answered from the shadows. Fear can be useful, but it corrodes the soul. It was Tyrion, stepping into a patch of moonlight. I had a conversation with Varys once about how the Targaryens kept power. He said that even a gentle queen needs to show strength, else the lords will test her. But there's a fine line between strength and terror. Daenerys rose. And which side do you think I'm on? Tyrion tilted his head. So far, you've shown mercy. But you can't expect all to bow to your benevolence forever. Some might see it as weakness. And that is when they will strike. She clasped her hands. If they do, I'll defend what we've built. But I won't become what my father was, a tyrant. Or even what some might say my ancestors were. Tyrion gave a small nod of respect. That's all I needed to hear. With that, he offered a half-smile, then left her to her thoughts. Beyond the capital, the realm slowly mended. Spring rains nourished the fields. Caravans ventured forth, carrying supplies to towns still recovering from the undead onslaught. The roads, once deserted, filled with travelers again. Lords who had scattered their forces began to recall their men, forging new alliances in the name of Queen Daenerys. From the north came word that Sansa governed well, ensuring every holdfast was stocked with provisions for the next winter. Yara Greyjoy wrote to say that the Iron Islands were reclaiming their seas, driving out any pirates or stragglers who once served Euron. From Dorne, a delegation arrived, bringing exotic fruits and wine as a gesture of goodwill, reaffirming their centuries-old ties with House Targaryen. Amid these developments, Jon and Daenerys navigated a delicate personal dance. Their shared purpose in defeating the Night King had forged an unbreakable bond, but the day-to-day realities of ruling sometimes pulled them in opposite directions. Daenerys was expected to remain in the Red Keep, settling disputes, receiving envoys. Jon found himself missing the north, longing for the quieter, more honest ways of his home. Yet, almost every evening, they found a private moment, walking along the ramparts or lingering at dinner once the courtiers had filed out, where they exchanged tired smiles and remembered what they had fought for. Once, at the suggestion of Ser Davos, they ventured to Flea Bottom in disguise, flanked only by Grey Worm and Arya. There, among the city's poorest district, they witnessed the harsh realities that no courtly decree could immediately solve. Children living in cramped hovels, beggars thronging the muddy streets, ex-soldiers turned to petty theft. Daenerys' heart ached at the sight, recalling how she had once freed slaves in Meereen. Here, though, the plight was different, rooted in poverty, not outright bondage. Jon spoke with a few street urchins who recognized him from stories. One child shyly asked if he truly had killed the Night King. He knelt, told them he had played his part, but so had many others. When they returned to the Red Keep that night, Daenerys was quiet. She said, "If the realm is at peace, but our people still starve, what good is my reign?" Jon offered no easy answer, only his presence and a vow to help. In the days that followed, they set about organizing public work projects, commissioning new wells, distributing grain more fairly. Cersei, sullen and watchful, said nothing, though there were moments in which a bitter expression crossed her face when she observed Daenerys acting with compassion, something that seemed almost alien to the deposed queen. Weeks stretched into months. Routines formed. A great gathering of the realm's lords was scheduled, a council intended to formalize new laws and settle any remaining disputes. Daenerys sat the throne, Jon at her side, Tyrion and Davos close by. Arya slipped in and out, uninterested in the pomp but always watchful. Cersei still occupied her old apartments in the Red Keep, technically a guest, though guarded. Occasionally she appeared at court but said little. Rumor had it that Qyburn continued to dabble in unnatural arts in the depths of the keep, though no proof emerged. Then one afternoon, Viserion let out a thunderous roar that shattered the calm. It came from the skies above the Red Keep, where the dragons had been sunning themselves. Daenerys and Jon hurried to the courtyard, along with half the castle, alarmed by the noise. They saw Viserion flapping wildly, as if in sudden distress. Drogon and Rhaegal swooped around him, crooning in concern. One of the castle's towers shuddered. Bits of stone fell away. Soldiers shouted, pointing up. Daenerys reached out mentally, or so it felt, calling to him with the intangible bond she shared. Jon did the same, though his connection was weaker, more an empathic echo than a direct link. Viserion circled, spouting a gout of flame tinged faintly with blue at the edges. A wave of panic swept the crowd below. But then, with a final screech, the pale dragon steadied himself and descended, landing in the courtyard, sending up clouds of dust. Daenerys approached cautiously, calling his name in Valyrian. She could see the anguish in Viserion's glowing eyes, though not the icy glow of old, but rather a flicker of pain. She pressed a hand to his neck. The scales felt feverish, hot to the touch. He let out a low, mournful sound. Slowly, Drogon and Rhaegal landed beside him, offering draconic reassurances. Jon came up beside Daenerys, heart pounding. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, scanning Viserion's body for any sign of a fresh wound. She shook her head. "I don't know. He hasn't been truly the same since we freed him. The remnants of the Night King's magic. Perhaps it still lingers." "Can you heal it?" Jon asked, though he knew how little they truly understood about dragon biology or the necromancy that had once gripped Viserion. Tyrion approached, face pale. "Is he in danger?" Daenerys tried to soothe Viserion, speaking softly. "Why in Valyrian?" The dragon's pupils dilated, a clear sign of distress. Then he huffed, unleashing a breath that crackled with a strange energy. Where his flame struck the flagstones, a thin layer of frost formed before melting away. It was as though fire and ice battled within him. A hush fell. Soldiers nervously gripped their weapons, unsure whether to defend themselves or run. Drogon growled protectively at them as though warning them to stay back. Daenerys stroked Viserion's neck. "Easy, easy." She turned to Jon, tears glinting in her eyes. "He's in pain." Jon recalled how the Night King's hold had severed once they slew him, but the transformation had never been undone perfectly. Viserion had lived, yes, but perhaps the traces of that undead magic had etched themselves deeper than they realized. "We should get him somewhere quieter," Jon said. "The courtyard's too crowded." Carefully, they coaxed Viserion to follow them beyond the Red Keep's walls toward an open field overlooking the Blackwater. Drogon and Rhaegal followed closely. The onlookers watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. Once in the field, Daenerys continued trying to calm him. She placed her forehead against his muzzle, murmuring ancient words. Gradually, his trembling subsided. The interplay of heat and frost in his breath diminished. He lay down, wings spread over the grass, panting. Drogon and Rhaegal flanked him as though standing guard. "That's twice now," Daenerys whispered, kneeling in the grass. "He had a similar episode 2 weeks ago, but milder. I thought it was just a hiccup in his breathing. It's getting worse." Jon crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Is there any lore about dragons once touched by necromancy?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "None that I know. The Targaryen records barely mention dragons becoming whites. We've crossed into uncharted territory. But maybe Sam or Bran can help." He nodded. "We can send word to Sam at Winterfell, ask him to scour the Citadel texts further. Bran might be able to see some clue in his visions." Her hand curled around Viserion's muzzle. "I won't lose him again," she said fiercely. In the days that followed, messages flew between King's Landing and Winterfell. Sam responded that he would delve into ancient scrolls regarding magical corruption. Bran, more cryptic, replied only that he was searching the currents of time for answers. Meanwhile, Viserion's episodes came and went, moments when the lingering residue of icy magic clashed with his innate fire. Each time, Daenerys and Jon soothed him, and each time he recovered. But the uncertainty gnawed at them. Beyond this looming shadow, the realm continued to adapt to its new order. Lords arrived from every corner, each with their own demands and boons. Daenerys granted more freedoms to small folk than had been customary, winning her some measure of adoration but also stoking resentment among those lords who preferred a stricter feudal hierarchy. The debates in court grew heated. Tyrion struggled to maintain a balance between progressive reforms and the conservative instincts of the nobility. In one particularly contentious session, a group of wealthy crownlands merchants complained that the new trade levies were too high. Daenerys listened, then responded with measured patience, "We need these funds to rebuild roads and granaries to ensure no one starves when winter returns. The burden must be shared, not foisted on the poorest among us." Some of the merchants bowed grudgingly while others left fuming. That evening, Jon found Daenerys alone in the throne room, gazing up at the Iron Throne. The torches cast shifting shadows across its jagged blades. She sensed his approach but didn't turn around. "It's a heavy seat," she said softly, "in more ways than one." He stepped closer, voice quiet. "You bear it well." She let out a weary sigh. "Some days it feels like I'm fighting a different war, less bloody, perhaps, but just as draining. And in the midst of it all, Viserion suffers. I can't help but think, did we truly save him, or did we condemn him to this half-life?" Jon's heart twisted at her words. He reached out, gently turning her to face him. "We saved him. He's alive, and he has you, Drogon, and Regal by his side. That's more than what awaited him under the Night King. We'll find a way to ease his pain." She nodded, though her eyes glistened. "I trust you," she whispered. "Without you, we'd never have freed him in the first place." He drew her into a soft embrace. Outside the windows, the moon hung low over the city. The hush of the throne room felt almost sacred. Then, with a rueful smile, she pulled away, remembering they had a council meeting scheduled. The chores of rule never ceased. And so life went on. The realm stabilized inch by inch. Trade routes reopened, the people gradually accepted Daenerys as their monarch, and the lords who once doubted found themselves benefiting from the restoration of order and commerce. Jon oversaw a reorganization of the City Watch, ensuring it was no longer merely a tool for tyranny but a force that genuinely protected the citizenry. The small council, composed of Tyrion as Hand, Davos as Master of Ships, and a mix of new and old advisors, busied itself with the countless tasks required to knit the kingdom back together. Cersei lurked in the background. She attended some councils, said little, and occasionally offered barbed remarks. Yet she did nothing overtly treasonous. Tyrion suspected she was waiting for an opportunity, but with the realm's gaze upon her, she had little room to maneuver. Jon, in private, expressed concern that her submission was too sudden. Daenerys shared that concern, but neither had proof of any foul play. They kept her under subtle guard, ensuring the Golden Company's contracts were renegotiated so their loyalty now lay with the crown, not her personal coffers. Cersei's eyes burned with resentment whenever she realized how thoroughly her power had been stripped. At last, a raven arrived from Winterfell bearing Sam's findings. Daenerys and Jon read it together in her solar. The text was dense, written in the Citadel's fussy script, but Sam's essential point was that dragons, being intrinsically magical creatures, could experience a rejection phenomenon when corrupted by dark sorcery, especially if that sorcery is partially lifted. The text referred to an obscure legend of a Valyrian dragon that had once been twisted by a rival sorcerer, then reclaimed by its rider, only to suffer fits of violent agony thereafter. The story ended cryptically, hinting that the only cure was for the dragon to be reborn in flame, though what that meant in practical terms was uncertain. Daenerys frowned. "Reborn in flame. That sounds like a riddle. Do we risk harming Viserion further if we try to burn out the remnants of ice magic?" Jon felt a knot in his stomach. It could mean something symbolic, like a cleansing ritual. Or it could literally mean submerging him in flame. That's dangerous. But if it could free him from the last vestiges of the Night King's hold. Before they could delve deeper, Bran's message arrived. It was even more cryptic. "He is caught between two states," Bran's letter read. "The currents of time show me that only a union of draconic fire and the blood that once bound him to the Night King can truly set him free." That last part was particularly baffling. The blood that once bound him to the Night King? The Night King hadn't bled like a normal man, and he was gone. Yet Daenerys' eyes lit with a sudden notion. "Your blood," she said, staring at Jon. "You're of the same bloodline that faced the White Walkers in ages past. The Stark blood combined with Targaryen. The Night King's hold touched your family, Bran, in particular. Could that be what Bran means?" Jon's face paled slightly. "You think I might have to, share my blood with Viserion? Some magical rite?" She shrugged helplessly. "I'm not certain. But in the north we have heard legends of sacrifice, of king's blood used in spells." She glanced away, troubled. Stannis Baratheon attempted to use such magic once, guided by Melisandre, to no good end. But perhaps there is a safer, older way. The idea of blood magic made Jon uneasy. He recalled the horrors unleashed by such practices in Essos and even beyond the Wall. Yet if it was the only chance to save Viserion from perpetual torment, he couldn't dismiss it. "We need more clarity," he said. They decided to invite Bran south, despite his reluctance to travel. A royal escort was dispatched to Winterfell, carrying Daenerys's personal letter urging Bran to come to King's Landing and guide them in this crucial matter. Sansa agreed, albeit reluctantly, ensuring Bran's safety for the journey. The message also informed them of Viserion's struggle, something Sansa found heartbreaking. She might have been wary of Daenerys's dragons initially, but she knew how much they mattered to Jon and the realm. During the weeks it took for Bran to arrive, Viserion's episodes became more frequent. Sometimes, the pale dragon would roar in the dead of night, stirring the entire castle from slumber. A swirl of frost-laced flames would scorch the sky, leaving arcs of steam where it dissipated. On more than one occasion, Daenerys and Jon were roused from bed to rush outside, calling him down from the battlements to soothe him. The small folk grew fearful, whispering that a cursed dragon resided in the city. But the other two dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, never left Viserion's side, as though understanding he needed their strength. At last, Bran arrived in a wheelhouse, accompanied by a small retinue of Stark guards and Samwell Tarly. Daenerys and Jon greeted them in the Red Keep's yard. Sansa had remained behind to rule the north in their absence, but she sent her love and cautioned them to be careful with any blood magic. Arya slipped out of the crowd to embrace Bran in her own subdued way, though the young man in the wheelchair barely seemed to register her presence. He stared off into the distance, his mind drifting in that ethereal realm only he could sense. They wasted no time. Bran asked to see Viserion immediately, so they led him to the field near the city walls, where Viserion perched on a rocky outcropping. Drogon and Rhaegal soared overhead, occasionally coming closer to check on their brother. Bran was helped from his chair and placed on a blanket, facing Viserion. The dragon snorted, releasing a puff of steam that half-formed into ice crystals. Bran closed his eyes, the strange swirl of milky whiteness overtaking them as he slipped into a vision or a warging trance. Minutes passed in tense silence. Daenerys stood on one side, Jon on the other, Sam nervously fiddling with a sheaf of notes, and Tyrion hovering in the background, wishing he could help but uncertain how. Bran's breathing quickened, and then a soft gasp escaped his lips. When he opened his eyes, they were wide with knowledge gleaned from beyond mortal ken. "He struggles against the imprint of the dead," Bran said in a hollow tone. "Part of him remains bound to the Night King's essence, even though the Night King is gone. The flames of life and the chill of undeath war within him." Daenerys swallowed. "How do we free him?" Bran's gaze flicked to Jon. "Through the blood that ties him to both life and ice. Stark blood, Targaryen blood. You are Aegon Targaryen, the union of ice and fire. If you are willing, you must act as a conduit for the cleansing flame." Jon felt his pulse quicken. "A conduit?" Bran nodded slowly. "I see a ritual old as the first forging of Valyrian steel. Blood offered freely, fire ignited by Dracarys. It must be done at a place of power, and the dragon must be wreathed in flame, but not killed. The fire will burn away the last vestiges of the Night King's magic, guided by your blood, which stands at the nexus of Targaryen flame and Stark ice. A living conduit. But it will be dangerous. The slightest miscalculation and Viserion could die, or you could." A chill swept through them. Sam stammered, "Isn't there a simpler way? A healing ointment or a spell that doesn't risk immolation?" Bran's distant gaze shifted. "The text I saw in my vision said only flame can end the chill of the grave. Only blood can guide the flame to spare the living from the dominion of death." He paused. "That is all I know." "I'm sorry." Daenerys turned to Jon, eyes brimming with worry. "You can't risk your life. The realm needs you. We both do." Jon set his jaw, remembering how they had once braved impossible dangers to free Viserion in the first place. "We can't leave him to suffer. He's alive because of us, and now he's in agony because of the remnants of that undead magic. If there's a chance to save him, I'll do it." She reached for his hand. "We'll find a way to make it safe." Tyrion spoke up, clearing his throat. "There might be a place of power here in King's Landing, the dragon pit. It was once the seat of Targaryen might, a place where dragons were kept, where their presence left a lingering resonance of magic, or so some claim. It's in ruins, but the structure remains. If anywhere could serve as a crucible for this ritual, perhaps that's it. Daenerys considered it, her expression tight with urgency. The dragon pit might suffice. It's large enough for Viserion to stand within, surrounded by stone rather than flammable timber. We can bring what we need, keep the city at a distance in case something goes wrong. Grey Worm, standing nearby, bowed. We will guard the perimeter if you command it, my queen. Ensure no one interferes. With the plan forming, they set about preparations. Missandei assisted Daenerys in gathering old Valyrian incantations that might help guide the ritual. Sam rummaged through the books he'd brought, searching for any reference to protective wards. Bran maintained his eerie calm, explaining that once the fire began, Jon would need to stay close to Viserion, allowing his blood to serve as the link. That was the part that frightened Daenerys most. She imagined the inferno, the swirl of draconic flame, and Jon standing in its midst, hoping the magic would spare him. At twilight, they made their move. The old dragon pit loomed atop the hill of Rhaenys, broken arches silhouetted against the crimson sky. It was a place of ghosts, where once dragons had roost, only to dwindle over generations. Now it would host a final test of life and death. Viserion followed reluctantly, guided by Daenerys' soothing voice and Drogon and Rhaegal's presence. Jon walked at the dragon's flank, nerves coiled tight. Grey Worm and the Unsullied formed a ring around the dragon pit's perimeter, keeping curious onlookers at bay. Cersei watched from a balcony of the Red Keep, though she was too distant to intervene even if she desired to. Some said they saw a faint smile curl her lips as if expecting disaster. Tyrion suspected she relished the possibility that Daenerys and Jon might fail, removing both from her path. But the city was quiet, unnaturally so, as if holding its breath. Inside the dragonette, rubble littered the ground, and half-collapsed walls bore the marks of centuries. Bran waited near the center, seated in his wheeled chair, eyes half-closed in concentration. Sam hovered nearby, fidgeting. Missandei stood with Daenerys, reading from a scroll of old Valyrian phrases intended to channel protective energies. Tyrion, Davos, and Arya watched from a safer vantage, though none of them could truly quell the dread pounding in their chests. Viserion rumbled uneasily, shifting his weight. Drogon and Rhaegal perched on the broken arches overhead, ready to unleash their own flames if needed. Jon came to stand by Viserion's head, meeting the dragon's gaze. He swallowed, recalling how he had once soothed wounded animals as a boy, how he had dared to approach Rhaegal not so long ago. But this was different, overshadowed by the threat of primal magic. Bran nodded at Daenerys, who in turn looked to Jon. He glanced around, seeing the circle of watchers, feeling the suffocating weight of the moment. Then, with a steadying breath, he drew a small knife of dragonglass from his belt. He pressed it to his palm, slicing across the flesh. Blood welled, dark in the dim light. He held his hand out toward Viserion, letting the dragon catch the scent. Viserion's pupils flared. The old link to the Night King had once tasted the essence of death, but now it sensed life, Stark blood, Targaryen blood. Daenerys murmured to him, bidding him remain calm. Meanwhile, Bran's voice rose in a low incantation, half in the language of the old gods, half in the cadences of Valyrian. Missandei joined him, reading from the scroll in a steady, ringing tone. The air felt charged as though lightning coiled in every breath. Jon stepped closer to Viserion, letting his blood drip onto the dragon's muzzle. The contact sent a shiver through him. He felt an indescribable chill, as if the remnants of ice magic had leapt to meet his own blood. For a moment, his vision blurred. He saw flickers of the Night King's face, the dead marching under swirling snow, and then a blast of dragon fire. He nearly stumbled. Daenerys caught his arm, her eyes wide with concern. Bran's chant grew louder. Daenerys called out a single command, her voice resonating with the authority that only a dragon rider possessed, Dracarys. In response, Drogon and Rhaegal unleashed torrents of flame from the arches above. The fire swept down in a great arc, encircling Viserion without directly striking him. The heat was immense, searing the air. The ancient stones glowed in the flickering light. Viserion roared, rearing back, uncertain whether to fight or flee. Daenerys continued, whispering urgently in Valyrian. Jon clutched Viserion's neck, refusing to be thrown off. The flames licked around them, forming a ring of living fire. Viserion hissed, caught between terror and something deeper. Bran channeled his visions, his voice resonating strangely. Let the living flame overcome the chill of death. Let the bond of blood guide it to spare the living soul. Jon felt as though his veins were alight. The cut on his hand burned like molten steel. He pressed his palm harder against Viserion's scales, his own voice rising unbidden. Words in High Valyrian tumbled from his lips, words he barely understood yet felt compelled to speak. Oblagon Vowers, Viserion. Aoha Prumia Ozanor Isa. Tetmani Jayamagan Dea Belma. Endure, Viserion. Your heart is strong. Yield not, do not fail. The ring of flame drew closer, intense heat buffeting them. Viserion shrieked, torn between fear and the call of healing. Blue sparks crackled along his jaws. Then, with a guttural roar, he opened his mouth and loosed a torrent of flame that collided with the ring of fire. Where they met, a blinding white flash erupted as if two opposing forces had fused. Jon's heart slammed in his chest. He felt the freezing presence of the Night King's magic surge through the contact as if trying to claim him. Yet his own blood, merged with Viserion's essence, fought back. In that instant, he sensed Daenerys's presence too, her love, her fury, her unwavering resolve. It poured into him, strengthening his will. He refused to yield. Viserion's shriek became a deafening crescendo. The swirling flame turned brilliant gold, then white-hot, then abruptly dissipated into a hiss of steam. A shockwave knocked Jon to the ground. He landed hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Daenerys cried out, rushing to his side. The stone floor smoked, glowing red in places. Dust and sparks rained down from the crumbling arches. For a.m. moment, no one moved. Then Tyrion, Davos, and Arya rushed forward, ignoring the scorching heat of the stones. They found Jon conscious but dazed, blood smeared on his hand and clothing. Daenerys lifted his head, relief flooding her eyes when she realized he still breathed. "Jon," she whispered, half sobbing. "Speak to me." He groaned, turning his head. "Viserion," he managed. All eyes turned to the dragon. Viserion lay sprawled on the stone, smoke drifting from his scales. Drogon and Rhaegal landed nearby, sniffing anxiously. For an awful moment, no breath stirred. Then, slowly, Viserion's sides heaved. He lifted his head, blinking. His eyes glowed not with blue, nor with haunted gold, but a clear, vibrant green flecked with hints of bronze, echoing the eyes he had once possessed in full health. A collective gasp swept the watchers. Daenerys helped Jon to his feet. Bran, pale and trembling, nodded once. "It is done," he said simply. Viserion uttered a soft rumble as if testing his own voice. Then he rose on shaky limbs, turned his gaze upon Jon and Daenerys, and let out a roar that sounded triumphant, free of the tortured undertones that had plagued him for so long. Drogon and Rhaegal joined in, their combined roars echoing throughout the broken dome of the Dragonpit, reverberating across King's Landing. Jon nearly collapsed again, but Daenerys supported him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to his. "You did it," she whispered. He let out a weak laugh. "We did it." Above them, the three dragons roared again in harmony, their calls reverberating like thunder. In that moment, it was as if the final shadow of the Night King had at last been banished from the realm. The living power of dragons, guided by love, had triumphed over the lingering chill of death. Word spread quickly. By dawn, the city buzzed with the rumor that Daenerys and Jon had performed a miracle in the old Dragonpit. Even those who had once doubted now whispered that perhaps these Targaryens and their allies were anointed by fate itself. The fear that Viserion was a cursed dragon gave way to awe that he had been fully restored. The small folk spoke of the three dragons as living symbols of rebirth and hope. For Daenerys and Jon, that day marked both an end and a beginning. They had undone the last chain binding Viserion to the dead. Now they could move forward, truly forging the realm they had dreamt of, a realm united under justice, with a queen who led by compassion and a king, or prince, or warden of the north. Titles mattered less than the man himself, who had proven that duty, honor, and self-sacrifice could shape destiny. The scars of the war against the Night King would forever remain in stories, in graveyards, and in the lines etched into people's faces. But with Viserion at last freed from that icy grip, it felt as though a brighter dawn had arrived. Over time, Daenerys consolidated her rule. Cersei remained a thorn, but with no allies, she had little choice but to keep her head bowed. The possibility of quiet plots still loomed, but she could no longer ignite a civil war on her own. The Golden Company had sworn loyalty to the crown, and key alliances with the North, Dorne, and the Iron Islands ensured that any whisper of rebellion would be swiftly checked. Tyrion oversaw the integration of new policies, ensuring the crown's coffers were spent on repairing the destruction that had ravaged the realm. Ser Davos championed measures to aid the poorest districts, distributing food and medicine. Arya, restless, often vanished on journeys of her own, though she would return sporadically to see her family and exchange cryptic smiles with the Hound. Bran, having fulfilled his part in saving Viserion, spent less time in King's Landing and eventually returned north, stating that he belonged amid the Weirwoods. Jon found some measure of peace in the new arrangement. Though courtiers and lords insisted on calling him prince, he wore no crown. He served as Daenerys's partner, her counsel, and at times her shield. When matters grew too stifling, he would mount regal and fly beyond the city's walls for a day, visiting outlying villages, listening to the needs of the common folk. Sometimes Daenerys joined him on Drogon or accompanied them atop Viserion, who had taken to giving her gentle nudges with his muzzle as if in apology for all the pain he had caused in his undead state. She always scolded him affectionately, never apologized for living. Those rides reminded them both of the freedom they once tasted in the savage north, a time when they fought side by side, forging a bond in the midst of peril. Now, that bond endured in a different way, shaped by the tasks of rebuilding a fractured kingdom. Yet the core remained, their love for each other and for the realm they had saved. The dragons, all three, soared across the skies, visible proof that unity and redemption were possible. In a final gesture that symbolized the melding of old divisions, Daenerys declared that the Targaryen sigil, once a three-headed dragon of red on black, would be displayed alongside the dire wolf of House Stark in royal regalia. It was a subtle but potent acknowledgement of Jon's heritage and the alliance between North and South. When new coins were minted, they bore on one side the three dragons and on the other side a stylized direwolf's head. Some sneered at this blending of symbols, calling it unprecedented. Others, particularly the common folk, saw it as a sign that never again would the kingdom's regions stand as mortal enemies. When winter finally receded from the northernmost reaches and springtime wildflowers bloomed across the fields near Winterfell, Daenerys and Jon traveled north with their retinue. Word spread of a grand gathering in the Godwood, a private affair meant only for kin and close friends. There, beneath the ancient weirwood tree, they exchanged vows, a union not simply of Targaryen and Stark, but of two souls bound by trials no other could fathom. Sansa bore witness, as did Arya, Bran, in his far-seeing calm, Tyrion, Davos, Sam, and a host of others whose lives had been interwoven by fate. Ghost padded quietly at Jon's side, and the dragons circled overhead. Some said the weirwood's carved face looked almost pleased, as if the old gods smiled upon the moment. No grand festival accompanied it, just a solemn, joyous oath that they would face all storms together, defend the realm they loved, and protect its people from whatever darkness might arise in centuries to come. And though no one spoke it aloud, all remembered the day they had freed a dragon from the grasp of death itself, uniting the living in a final stand against the endless night. So it was that the realm entered a new era. The living dragons soared together, Drogon, fearsome and powerful, regal, swift and watchful, and Viserion, redeemed and whole. The North, once distrustful, found pride in their lord who was both a Stark and a Targaryen, and in the queen who had stood by him in the face of doom. The southern lords, witnessing the healing of King's Landing and the just governance Daenerys upheld, slowly laid aside their old fears of Targaryen madness. Rumors of further expansions, renewing roads, building schools, even establishing new seats of knowledge, swirled among the people, kindling excitement for the future. And when children asked about the scarred dragon with faint patches of discoloration, their parents would tell them the tale, how he had been claimed by the Night King's chill but rescued by the unyielding warmth of his family's love. How Jon Snow, born of ice and fire, had offered his own blood to burn away the last chain of undeath. How Daenerys Stormborn, the Dragon Queen, refused to abandon her child even in the darkest hour. And how, at the end of it all, the three dragons soared free, heralding a dawn no one had dared to dream of. Thus the living triumphed, forging a realm united not by fear, but by hope. And in the sky above Winterfell or King's Landing, day or night, the roar of dragons reminded the realm that life, once nearly eclipsed by an endless winter, had emerged victorious.